pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Agenda. Doug, any changes? Council, any changes?
Kelly? You said Doug Kelly?
Oh, yes.
Force of habit.
Interim city manager.
No changes, Your Honor.
Thank you. Council, any changes? Hearing none, I move that we adopt the agenda. Is there a second?
Second.
All in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. All opposed? Motion carries unanimously. Open forum. I have a number of items here. It looks like most of these relate to other items. There is one that does not relate to an item on the agenda, so we'll call that one now. Jared Kuhn, League of Minnesota Cities Workshop. Just for the rest of you, we'll call those items when those items come up before the council. Name and address for the record, please.
Jared Kuhn, 820 Interlincoln. Thank you, Mayor. Thank you, Council. After the last meeting, you had a workshop with the League of Minnesota Cities. I was there to attend the whole meeting and would like to recommend that any feedback that the League of Minnesota Cities gives back to us, that it gets put out on the website so that all the residents can see that feedback. I'm not sure if it has been given back yet, but once it is, I would hope that it's put on the website. Also, I think that they requested that more training would be recommended. I believe that that should be done based off of the communications that was presented for the upcoming town hall meeting that was kind of scheduled at here. I don't know, it seems like a lot of the people that should be present weren't notified and given proper notice and time.
We're going to be talking about the...
And I know we're going to be talking about it, but I just thought that because of that, and it was brought up at the training on how to bring up those meetings, it seems like it wasn't taken seriously. And I think anything that the League of Minnesota Cities recommends should be taken seriously, since they do provide us insurance, and the last thing we need is not to be insured. So I would recommend more training or continued training once the new council gets put in place. But thank you.
Yep.
Thank you.
Two separate items there. First, council, does anybody have any objection to posting the League of Minnesota City report?
None whatsoever.
No, I actually thought it had already been posted.
So did I. So
Is there a report? Yes.
yeah, we got it. Kelly, can we get that posted on the website? So that takes care of the first item. The second item, that the town hall meeting, the requirement and the policy passed by the council was that items for the council meetings should be out by Tuesday for the following meeting. So that task force that I asked for was put out way in advance so that people could look at it. We'll talk more about this later. I don't want to get sidetracked till we get to that item. But the statement that we did not follow or I did not follow policy is inaccurate. So, council, any other comments? Otherwise, we'll move on. Okay, let's go ahead and move on. Is there anybody else that would like to address as part of the open forum? Please state your name and address for the record.
Mark Schneider, 1950 Edgewater Place, Victoria. I witnessed the motion to remove Sharon Eklund from the parking committee and replace Miss Eklund with Jim Paulson, as put forth by Councilmember Striegel at the council meeting on September 24th, 2018. and passing of this motion with yes votes from council members Striegel, Crowley, and Vogt. Hopefully both of these people were spoken to prior to this motion. If not, that is just plain wrong, and someone owes one or both of these people an apology. I found this action to be another example of the back alley shenanigans that brought the OML lawsuit. Apparently, certain members of this council didn't learn from the OML mess. Common sense would tell most people that behavior similar to the OML issues will not go over well. Apparently, the OML issue was not a teaching moment for three on this council. Even if this motion didn't fall into the category of back alley, the perception of back alley is definitely there. I was also at the council meeting when the parking committee was selected. My name was on the list of residents volunteering to be on the committee, but of course, with my outspoken opinions on the OML mess and the actual selection process, I had no chance of being selected on the committee. I knew that. Mr. Reeder will recall, Mr. Reeder's not here, my emails concerning volunteering for the parking committee. I'm quite certain I was the first resident to volunteer in writing and in person. Well, Kelly, I came and saw you at City Hall to participate on the parking committee. Not being selected isn't my problem here. Trust me, not my problem. Council members continuing to operate like they own the city is my problem. Council members operating like there is no common sense, proper methods of rule, regardless of perceived or actual rules, is my problem. The personal agendas of council members should never be forced on Victoria residents with last-minute motions like council member Striegel on September 24th, in my opinion. This motion by Mr. Striegel and approval with yes votes from council members Striegel, Crowley, and Vogt is the latest example of this city not having sufficient policies and procedures to prevent behavior like this. Unfortunately, lack of policies and procedures in this city has allowed council members, past and present, to take advantage of situations to someone's advantage and to make decisions that may not be in the best interest of the majority of Victoria residents. This behavior has to stop. Mayor Funk has been pushing for a total review of all city policies and procedures that should result in a clarification of all of these policies and procedures. I'm hopeful this situation will push staff and council to get this done sooner than later. Stop this nonsense and use your common sense until all the policies and procedures are clarified and written down. Don't take advantage of us, the Victoria residents. If there is a unanimous agreement and justification to remove Sharon Eklund from the parking committee, so be it. Replace her. If there is no unanimous agreement or justification, leave her on the committee. But if replacement is the decision, Ms. Eklund's replacement should be chosen from the original list of resident volunteers. The Victoria City Council will have 2 new members the morning of November 7. I'm hopeful the 2 new members, and all City Council members will simply do what's right for the majority of Victoria residents and not be tempted to do what's best for the interests of themselves, local businesses, and acquaintances. Thank you.
Thank you, Mark. Council?
Yes, Mr. Schneider, if you could, I just wanted to respond, and maybe if you could just hang out for a minute, because I had a couple of questions I wanted to really respond to your inquiry. So first of all, I have spoken.
I didn't know that. Can I ask you a question?
Sure.
I didn't think I was ever allowed to do that.
This is a discussion. That's open
okay.
forum is an
Go for
opportunity to discuss. So
okay.
First of all, I just want to let you know that I have spoken with both people, And it was a failure on my part to make that motion. I didn't
You
speak
spoke to him before or after the motion?
I did not speak to him before, and so I have apologized to both of them.
Okay, very good.
Since then.
Appreciate it.
And since you were at the meeting when we did appoint the task force, you know that my motion to remove Ms. Eklund was consistent with the discussion that night and the position that night. And it was, and we can agree or disagree, but it was based on the idea that since parking has been a hot topic, and in fact, I think the local newspapers have asked that as part of the candidate profiles,
Yep.
what they think. To me, it seemed unfair and inappropriate for some of the council candidates to be able to give a position while others were in a position of creating a position. And so, to me, it just seemed reasonable that if you're on the task force or if you're campaigning and that's an issue, that you shouldn't be out there objectively gathering information to try to formulate policy recommendations.
I hear you, Mr. Striegel. There's one big difference, though, that we all know.
What is that?
Mrs. Sharon was not a candidate when she volunteered to be on the committee.
Correct, which is
Correct.
why I voted in favor of
Right.
appointing her to the task force. And the next day, when she applied for, made her candidacy known, when it became clear that in order to be consistent, that a motion should be made to replace her.
Okay.
Again, it was, I don't know her, she doesn't know me. It was
I've met her once.
an impersonal decision. It was more based on what I felt would be fair and objective for everyone. But anyways, I am interested in what your view is of this as a back alley situation.
It just seemed, having been involved in all the OML dealings pretty much from day one, your motion kind of came out of nowhere at the very, very end of the meeting. I don't believe it was on the agenda.
It was actually, and that we just bought a whole bunch of things up in once here. So first of all, in terms of lack of policy and procedure, the policy is that the agenda can be changed by a vote of the majority of the council. And so I made a motion at the beginning of that meeting to add that agenda item. There was a majority vote to add it. So then at the appropriate point in the agenda, I think the mayor just added it to the bottom of new business, which is the appropriate place. So that's how that happened. It was following policy. It was with a vote of the majority of the council. And so there is, we can argue again about whether that's an appropriate policy, but it was completely within policy the way it was done.
Yeah, pretty rough policy if we can just come up with motions and not talk to any of the parties involved that are right in the middle of the motion. That's all I'll say. So I probably missed the first 5 minutes of the meeting, so maybe I didn't hear that, Mr. Striegel, and if that's the case, I apologize. I guess
No
you
apology
did
needed. I've always said the biggest part of this job is education, because it's a lot of little details, and my goal is always make sure people understand if I've taken a position or made a vote on something that you understand why, and we can agree or disagree. But
Right, there's been a lot of talk about perception over the last year and a half through this OML stuff. Mm-hmm. I'm just going to tell you, the perception is not good on how that motion was handled. So right or wrong, good or bad, expert on how a meeting should be handled, I'm not. That's all good and dandy, but the perception is that it was handled improperly.
Yeah, and just to be clear, my apology to both parties was both on not notifying them beforehand and having that conversation.
Right.
So
very good.
I acknowledge that it could have been done in a much better way. It wouldn't have changed my motion, but at least it would have been a little more open in terms of how it was handled.
Fair enough.
So thank you for your comments.
Councilman Striegel, could I ask you one question?
Certainly.
Jim Paulson was never an applicant for the parking task force. How did his name get on that email that he was an applicant?
Can't answer that. I know that another resident put both their names in. And then when I advised the city manager that I would be making this motion, the list of people who were interested but hadn't been selected was given to me, and that was where I picked Mr. Paulson's name from. So I can't tell you how it got there.
I can. Can I address the podium?
Yeah,
Is that
Mark,
okay?
Please.
I can.
come on up. The name and address for the record, please.
Mark Kelly, 865 Woodland Hills Boulevard. You're right. Mr. Amundsen, Tim Amundsen, had put his name in for consideration for the parking committee, and he had, unbeknownst to Jim Paulson, suggested him as a potential other good candidate. So maybe that's where it came up. My question is, how could we put forth an applicant or a name that no one had ever talked to? He didn't want the position from day one. That's my question. So it seemed like you remove one and you add one just to do it, and nobody had ever asked that particular person, in this case Jim Paulson, whether he was interested.
So again, after the, and thank you for the question.
Yep.
And after I had made my intentions known, I was given a list by city staff of who was interested but hadn't been selected in the original round.
And I could see how that bled into the list.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. I'm satisfied. Thank you.
I think it's an important data point to note that in that meeting, which was 24 September, I asked the majority on this council to delay that discussion until this meeting because the next parking task force doesn't meet until November. So we had time to bring both Sharon Eklund in and Jim Paulson in so that they could be here and speak in front of the council before the action was taken. And the majority on the council declined to do that. And as such, we held the vote on 24 September that removed Ms. Eklund from the task force and appointed Jim Paulson.
Thank you. Yeah, I appreciate that, revisiting that point, and also the reason why I declined, or why I was one of the votes to decline delaying, was because of things like the candidate profiles that were being published in the paper and the League of Women Voters Forum, which was last week, which all would have come before this meeting and therefore would have required those people to either abstain from a conversation, which I think puts them at a disadvantage, or to take a position on something that they should be objective about. So, and I stated that at the time. So, again, thanks for recollecting that.
All right, at this point, I'm going to cut off that discussion on that topic since it is an item that we're going to talk about later in the agenda. Is there anybody else that would like to address the council on anything else? All right, seeing none, that completes the open forum. Next item is the consent agenda. Anybody can remove anything from the consent agenda for any reason. So staff, council, anyone in the audience, does anybody want to remove anything from the consent agenda? Going once, twice. All right, seeing none, I move that we adopt the consent agenda. Is there a second?
Second.
All in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. All opposed? Hearing none, motion carries unanimously. The agenda is adopted. All right, the first item is new business, street program overview. Kara?
Good evening, Mayor and Council. This item is on the agenda just to provide an overview to the City Council and to just start some discussion. We're not looking for any council action tonight. So I have a fair amount of information. I will try to not belabor the point too long, but so the first thing I just want to touch on briefly is pavement management and the elements of a street program. And I will come back to this slide later, but this is the pavement management curve that I've shown the council many times over the last year. But specifically, we're looking at the age of a pavement system. So we're talking specifically about bituminous pavement. So that's the type of pavement we use in most of the metro area, as opposed to concrete, which is used in the metro area on highways, and is also used extensively in the state of Iowa, apparently. But as the pavement ages, it starts to deteriorate over time. So it's in its best condition when it's first constructed, and With no routine maintenance completed, it'll deteriorate over time to the point where the road needs to be reconstructed. As part of a pavement management program, you want to make sure that you have maintenance programmed into your program with the goal to extend the life of that initial investment to be not just in that 20 to 30 year time period, but the goal being to extend that substantial investment you're making in the initial construction costs of the road to last 50 years. You do have the potential for a 50-year road life if you have a properly constructed road in the first place, and then you are committed to a preventative maintenance program. The city has a very long and, to me, interesting history with developing its street improvement program. Back in the 90s, the city hired two different engineering firms to complete studies looking at how to evaluate the city streets that were in rough shape at the time and develop a program for going forward. It really took from 1993 to 2005 for the city to work through all the different elements that go into a street program and to settle on a plan for how to tackle maintaining roads. This is a pretty common problem for many cities. You hear a lot of talk about the streets in St. Paul and the condition that those roads are in. They have a lot more street miles to tackle than we do, of course. But elements of a program include evaluating the condition of all of the streets, but first and foremost, it's really coming up with standards for how new roads are going to be built and for how to reconstruct roads that have failed. Those elements took quite a lot of years for the city to work through, how to best have money invested in street standards. So newly constructed streets beginning in the late 90s were built to a 9-ton standard, 28 feet wide with a 2-foot sand section underneath the roadway and drain tile. Every street since the late 90s that's been constructed with development has met those standards. But then we also had to come up with standards for when we were reconstructing streets. Typically, these reconstructed streets were in existing neighborhoods, oftentimes without concrete curb and gutter, without storm sewer systems. Some of the streets were only 22 feet wide. One of these rounds of trying to move forward ended up kind of falling apart over, do you put a 28-foot wide street in an existing roadway? Do you widen what's there out to 28 so you have the same streets as the new streets? Well, you can imagine that can be quite impactful as you try to widen a roadway where people have trees and yard features and things that they consider to be their own yard next to their house. So after a lot of analysis, the council settled on only going with a 7-ton road for low-volume roads and that we wouldn't go any wider than 24 feet wide in cases that already had narrow streets. Parking is restricted to one side of the street in those cases, and then the sand section would vary based on conditions of the roadway. So if the sanitary sewer system and water systems needed to be replaced, resulting in a need to excavate down 7 or 8 feet, we'd put in 2 feet of sand. We also the council had to agree upon a maintenance program for going forward, and what the city settled on was crack sealing and seal coating the streets targeted on an every 7-year basis. At the time, we looked at anywhere from 5 to 7 years, but we have been able to stick to that 7-year basis because we have found that the seal coats are holding up quite well. And then we also settled on an overlay schedule targeted at every 20 years or when needed. Then we also had to develop a street capital improvement program. So we identified and programmed street and storm sewer capital improvements for all the existing streets. So streets that were in poor shape were identified for what the recommended repair needed to be or improvement needed to be, and a schedule was developed for prioritizing those improvements. The city spent a considerable amount of time developing an assessment policy, so looked at a wide variety of scenarios for assessing for improvements, anywhere from assessing none of the costs to assessing all of the costs. The current assessment policy was adopted in the early part of the 2000s. And then the council also had to develop a financing strategy for funding maintenance and all the needed improvements. So the funding strategy included a combination of the items listed here. So since that time, the city has completed over 18 capital improvement projects, representing about $24.5 million in issued bonds to fund all of those improvements. Everybody on this list received the pleasure of having a special assessment against their property, ranging from the low end to the more recent reclaim projects, some as low as $2,300 to, I think Bay Cliff had the highest assessment, and theirs was like $19,000, but they were also getting water and sewer. They had water and sewer, but it's a low-density neighborhood, so.
Sarah, could I interrupt just
Yeah.
a second? For all of these projects, mics are really loud. For all of these projects, is the length of the bonds similar? So are they gonna expire one after another?
Yes.
Yes,
Looking
they're
at
all
the finance.
15-year bonds, so we're starting to see some drop off now.
Okay.
If you look at the bond debt per capita, or not per capita, but just the debt curve over time, you'll notice it rolls off. It's not a cliff, it's a roll off because of that.
Yeah, essentially, what the city council first concluded back in, it was really 2005 was when the city council began to ramp up figuring out how to fund these projects every year. They set out to be able to bond for the improvements without having to significantly raise taxes to fund the improvements. So that had been the framework that we had started with, and the council was looking at doing $2 to $3 million per year in projects. In reality, that really varied depending on what the improvements needed to be, and we took a few years off. 2012 was the year Highway 5 was closed through all of downtown, and then 14 and 15, we took a couple years off, and I was having a hard time remembering why, and then looked around and realized we were building 2 new buildings at that time, so the council didn't want to be tackling those projects at the same time as these other things were going on. But it's a pretty remarkable commitment to get through all of these streets and be not behind like so many cities find themselves being in. So during that period of time, that represents significant improvements to nearly 20 miles of city streets. And I'll hop over to the map here in a minute. We're down to only 3 miles of unplanned improvements from that initial plan way back in 2005. But what's interesting to note is in the same period, a little bit longer, but in the last 20 years, developers have constructed over 23 miles of new streets funded by the purchasers of the new homes. So we've got a whole lot of roads out there, which you'll see from the map is really essentially every street in the city has been improved. So the blue streets are developer constructed streets that were built after that sand section was added, so have the 2-foot sand section. All of these streets shown here in blue were built in the last 20 years. And then the green streets are all the streets that the city council has completed capital improvements to. So other than the couple of purple streets that are left, which I'll talk about in a minute, this represents a pretty sizable commitment by the city to get your infrastructure up to standard. The purple streets are what we consider to be unplanned, and they're unplanned for various reasons. Maple and Cry are gravel streets over on the west end of town. They were gravel when they were annexed into the city, and under the orderly annexation agreement, we can't initiate improvements to those streets without a 100% petition from the property owners. That's part of the annexation agreement. So those will remain gravel until such time as the residents choose otherwise. Steiger Lake Lane in downtown, I think you all know those reasons why those aren't programmed yet. There's some older streets in this area that haven't been completed yet, and part of the complication there is 80th Street next to the businesses. We had completed some feasibility work and then worked with the property owners and decided not to improve it. The businesses were looking at pretty hefty assessments, and it was going to hit right after Highway 5 was going to be closed for a year, so there was concern about, business challenges from having the highway closed. So those are just kind of waiting in the unplanned column until there's more interest in seeing it move forward. Rolling Bluff is a little gravel cul-de-sac that we did some initial study of a number of years ago. They need sanitary sewer, so until such time as they're ready to connect to city sewer, it's a really costly assessment, so we opted to not proceed until the residents were ready to have their sewer extended to them. And then, of course, we have Marsh Lake Road. I have it listed as unplanned because it seems as though we're never actually going to be reconstructing that street, but it is in the capital improvement plan for 2019. When we discussed it last, I was indicating to the council that it's probably 2020 at the soonest, but those conversations are ongoing, and that'll be coming back to the council at some point here when I have more information. So moving forward, you've got $24.5 million in bond proceeds committed to getting these streets all completed, plus the investment made by the home buyers who purchased all the homes and all these new lots. So it becomes really important that the city remain committed to maintenance strategies to extend the life cycle of the street. One of the things I heard from really every single neighborhood we went into was, okay, if I'm gonna make this investment and you're gonna assess me for this, I want to be sure that the city's committed to maintaining the streets. So often I'll have some of the neighbors call and say, when's my seal coat coming? I know we're getting close to 7 years, so it's fun to be able to say, yes, you're programmed for next year. But really the strategy for an successful pavement management program to extend the useful life depends on completing the right repair on the right road at the right time. So you don't want to be putting money prematurely into a maintenance strategy because that's not a cost-effective use of funds, but you also don't want to let the road deteriorate beyond the point of a seal coat or beyond the point of an overlay because the costs become significantly higher for every additional treatment type that you might have to have if you let too much time go by. So over the life cycle, it does result in a substantial life cycle cost savings if you do everything at the right point in time. So in the next 20 years, the city's looking at over 43 miles of street that are going to need maintenance to them. So under our program right now, each segment is programmed for a crack seal and seal coat every 7 years or sooner, but generally, as I noted, we're finding that we don't need to do it any sooner than 7 years. We also try to combine segments by neighborhood, so you aren't seeing a seal coat project happen 1 year on one part of the neighborhood and the next year, the next part of the neighborhood. The seal coating can be very disruptive. For those of you who've had the opportunity to experience that, you get the little chips that then your kids drag into your house and your dog drags into your house, and it's a bit of a nuisance, but it's a significant tool to make sure that the roads last what their intended life is. And then under our program, the intent is that a routine overlay would be programmed for year 20. Again, looking to organize by neighborhood, looking for the opportunity to combine streets for a larger project. But in reality, what's most important is that those decisions should be based on pavement condition. What I'm finding is that we don't have any of the roads yet that are quite 20 years old that were built with the sand section, but worthwhile example to look at out the window here is the first phase of downtown. Those streets were built in 2003, and if you drive through the existing part of downtown, aside from the pavers and some edge cracking, the pavement is in really, really good condition. So we think that we can reasonably extend out the timing of that overlay to be somewhere in that 20 to 30-year window, not right on the 20-year window. So we don't want to just blindly say, oh, it's year 20, do the overlay, if the pavement hasn't deteriorated and isn't showing some of the cracking that we would look for to signal that we need to do the overlay. And the reason we think for that is because of that sand section. So as a reminder, which all of you know, but the city of Victoria has really poor clay soils, like most of Carver County. So in the roads that didn't have that sand section underneath them, they weren't even lasting 20 years. So the poor subgrade soils were causing the gravel and the asphalt to fail, in some cases much less than 20 years. So now with that sand section in there, we are seeing the pavement system last longer. So moving forward, we do need to fund maintenance to protect the investments that have been made to date. What's important to note is per the city's current adopted assessment policy, seal coat, crack seal, and routine overlays are not assessed to the benefiting property owners. So that was part of the discussion. That was very purposeful by the council that adopted that policy. If you were going to assess everybody for the capital improvement, there was a commitment to fund the maintenance out of general taxes. So that is the current policy that exists today. Based on 2018 dollars, what I would estimate the city to be looking at over the next 20 years, and this would assume that we were overlaying at year 20, would be about $1.2 million in seal coating and $11 million in routine overlays. Knowing that this financial responsibility and obligation was going to be coming, the city council created the long-term street maintenance fund in 2011 with the intent to start setting aside funds to be able to fund those maintenance, seal coat and overlays when the time came to do that. The fund has a current balance of $1.46 million, and certainly Kelly could speak to how money is allocated to that fund. But what we need to do next is look at how to prioritize those overlays. So there's many different systems out there in terms of having a company come in, rate the streets on some frequency so that you would come up with a pavement condition rating. Some go from 0 to 5, some go from 0 to 10, some go from 0 to 100. That would set what the condition of the streets are. And depending on how complicated of a system we look for, it can look at age, it can look at pavement condition. And so what we want to do now over the next couple of months is evaluate what some of those options might be and bring that back to the city council for consideration. We could decide that the right thing to do is to just, on the simple side, have somebody from Public Works and somebody from engineering drive all the streets every year and pay attention to the conditions. That can be your simplest form of a way to evaluate conditions. You can get kind of carried away on the other extreme where you'll have a company come in with a truck that measures and evaluates everything as it goes up and down the road. So there can be a pretty wide range of spending associated with those options. So we would want to do some research and some evaluation on what we would recommend to the city council and bring that back in some months in the future. Right now, we aren't looking at doing an overlay. There's a couple streets I'm keeping an eye on. I just drove them again, I think. We could probably wait till 2020 on them. So we have a bunch of time to start to work on this. The bulk doesn't hit until 2023, I think, is the first year that a bunch of the streets are 20 years old. So we've got time to work through those issues. But that's something that staff will be working on over the next few months and then would bring back to the city council for discussion.
Thank you, Kara. One of the things I'd like to see is on this slide, the long-term street maintenance fund, current balance 146. I'd like to see that taken out over time because my assumption is there's going to be continued payments made into that fund, and at some point you're going to start expecting expenditures. So I'd kind of see what's the burn rate versus how much is going in. So is this balance going to go up or down, and take that out over time based on whatever assumptions would be valid, so that we can see over time, is there enough money there for 20 years from now, or are we short now and we need to up that, or vice versa?
Kelly already has that, so that's certainly something that we could share with the city council. Just note that it assumes that you're overlaying in year 20. And so I do think we can do better than what her projections are showing, but you have that currently up to date, correct?
I do, yes.
So I'm trying to picture the graph in my mind. Councilmember Striegel stated earlier that we have a graph that's kind of going down like this right now in terms of the current funded projects as those projects roll off from a bonding standpoint. So does that mean that as this one's ramping down, we're going to have another one that's going to ramp up at a lower rate, at a lower level to fund this, or are we looking to do this from cash?
We'd be looking to do all this from cash. So we've been setting aside money with the goal of hopefully not having to do any bonds for those.
And so the 12.2 million anticipated is over the life of 20 years, or is over 20 years, right? Okay.
Correct.
Hopefully more like 25, though.
Okay.
So the routine overlays are going to be cash too?
Yes.
So if I do the math, this says 12.2 million, 20 years, maybe 25, but worst case scenario, we'll hope is 20 years. That's a little over 600,000 a year. I think we've been setting aside roughly 150,000 a year for long-term street maintenance. So yes, we have a couple more years, and maybe this fund balance gets to 1.75, 1.8 million before we start spending. But that's 3 years worth.
There's a couple of
And
years.
then we're funding it at a quarter of its average demand.
And we also have the cash flow of the bonds rolling off.
There's a couple of years we did 200 to 300. It's varied.
I think that's why we need to see this over time.
Yep.
The expected burn rate versus the expected balance, and then from there we can adjust.
Yes, and beginning in 2020, the projections are to really ramp up the contributions to this fund. So in 2020, we're projecting 335,000 will be going in. And then by the time you get to the year 2028, we're looking at having 845,000 a year. So based on those projections, we'd be able to fund the projected overlays and the tax rate projections that we have that keep a stable tax rate do include these large increases to the long-term street maintenance fund.
Council, other points, questions?
Question on the kind of the road technology side. Is there technology coming that can extend the life of seal coat and overlay, and again, some optimism about those timelines extending even further, and what do you and your staff do to stay current?
So the pavement design itself has improved over time. So the mixed designs themselves are always being evaluated and revisited by MnDOT on behalf of all of us. Seal coat technology is something that we are going to be looking at and continuing to look going forward, because it does create such a nuisance for the homeowners. So Public Works is watching some alternative technologies that some other cities have been trying to see how that lasts over time. I'm somewhat hesitant to move away because our seal coats have proven to be really effective in maintaining the life cycle of the street. So like the engineer that I am, we tend to be a little slow to warm to new technologies, but it is important to pay attention to what else is out there and what other options are there, particularly when you talk about this nuisance issue. It's really problematic on cul-de-sacs, so that ends up being an area that we get a lot of complaints, because you have garbage trucks turning on the seal coat and it causes the aggregate to come up, and then we have to keep going out and sweeping the streets to try to help that tracking issue. I mean, homeowners don't like to have that stuff dragged into their house. and then you get through another plow season and they'll end up with some more aggregate in their lawn. So there are cities who've opted to eliminate seal coating because of those concerns. So that is an issue that we're all paying pretty close attention to. And I would think in the next 20 years, you likely will see some changes. But of course, we'd be evaluating those changes in terms of cost as well as just impact. So that, the seal coating is a very affordable, cost-effective way to extend the life cycle. So cost certainly would be a factor in those discussions.
Thank you.
Council, any other comments?
Question. So I presume from hearing this presentation that there's a huge PDF file or some kind of financial model that sits out there somewhere that has all 46 miles of road in there. So you've got a computation on every section of 46 miles of road that breaks it down into when it needs seal coating, breaks it down when it needs overlays versus complete reclamation. Is that true?
Correct. Yes. And it has the history of how many times it's been seal coated and when it's been seal coated. And
Okay,
we are
so-
still operating in an Excel spreadsheet because at 46 miles, it's still more manageable, in my opinion, in Excel. But bigger cities will have like robust asset management software for that.
Putting the costs in that you assume at the present, you should be able to calculate the seal coating and the overlays in perpetuity,
Yes.
going out 20 or 30 years.
Yeah, so every year that we add miles to the street, to the system, we immediately plug them into the spreadsheet and immediately program them for seal coat and overlay.
So you should be able to tell us every year how much we should put in that budget
Right.
to make sure we're covered.
Yep, and that's historically what we've been doing, but we were dealing with, these massive dollar amounts, and the overlays were out beyond our planning window. But now we're into the overlay planning window where we really need to figure out a way to be more precise about the timing versus just the road age. The last 20 years, the roads were all just in poor shape, so it was more about prioritization of finances.
I think the street capital improvement project of 2003, which we're just completing, was one of the smartest things the city ever did. I mean, to get these costs harnessed so we were able to do this without screwing up our debt load and everything else.
Well, and it was a huge commitment by a lot of different city councils over time and a lot of residents. And I mean, residents paid 50% of all of these project costs
That's
and are
true.
still paying them. And they had the pleasure of sitting through multiple meetings with me and had the pleasure of living through construction. So there's when I look at these projects, it's funny because there's some pretty great people in all of those neighborhoods that the city had an opportunity to work with and work through these projects. It was frankly kind of a fun thing to look back at when I was putting this agenda together.
All right, thank you. Anything else? Hearing none, next item. 5B, Parkwood. Kara, this is yours also.
Certainly, in the city's 2018 budget, the city budgeted $100,000 to improve an outlet control structure that's located near the Parkwood neighborhood. So this is Rolling Acres Road and 78th Street. This is Hyacinth, the Parkwood neighborhood. So Highway 5 is just to the north of here. Why don't I go to an actual map? So the structure is located, so here's Highway 5, here's Bavaria, Rolling Acres is north, 78th is here. So the structure is located roughly in about this area, and this is a large wetland complex, but there's essentially a creek that runs all the way through here that then continues all the way up and terminates in Schutz Lake. So it's part of a bigger system. I've heard rumors about how that structure was constructed back many, many years ago, but I don't really have any specific plans or anything in the city files associated with that. What I can tell you is it's been failing. I think 2005 was probably the first time Public Works had me go out and take a look at it. So it's been something that we've been paying attention to over time, but in the more recent years, property owners who live around this area are becoming increasingly concerned about flooding because the water is essentially not being managed. So it's starting to go around the outlet structure and is eroding the bank pretty poorly. Mayor, this is the project you had an opportunity to go out and take a look at with me during budget time.
All right, we walked this, right?
Yep. So we went ahead and solicited, put a bid package together and solicited quotes to replace the structure there. And quotes were received from 3 contractors as follows: Parrott, Menger, and Kuski, with Parrott providing the lowest quote at $57,320. If the council does authorize proceeding with this project, it has a substantial completion date of January 15th and a final completion date of June 1st. The reason for the lag there is just to make sure that any restoration grows and the area gets restored, because they'd prefer to do this work when it's colder than in the summer. As noted, the 2018 budget does include $100,000 for this project. So we would be looking for a motion to approve the quote, or certainly Ann and I are available for any questions.
Council, questions?
Kara, when you say it's failing, what's failing about it? Is it too small from a volume standpoint? Is it structured?
The water just doesn't go through it anymore. It just goes around the side of it. So oddly, I had so many pictures of this, but none of them were quite the right angle. But the water is supposed to go through this structure, and instead it's just bypassing it altogether.
So that thing that's in the air is actually the inlet?
Yeah. The inlet of the outlet structure. So water should be flowing in here, and then in high water events, it's supposed to go over the top of the structure, and instead it's just going all around it.
I see.
Okay, failure is clearer.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Council, other questions?
I'm curious, the difference in the bids is huge. And you have one for 57 and one for 84. How can that be? I mean, does that indicate there's some kind of problem?
No, everybody's just really busy. So I was kind of surprised Kuski and Menger even provided a quote to us. But Parrott does a lot of work for the city, and it just seems like I don't know if it's their size. But
I think so.
They tend to come in lower on these bigger projects than some of these other big companies.
I'll make a motion to approve the quote from Parrott Contracting, Inc. in the amount of $57,320 for the Parkwood outlet control structure replacement.
Is there a second?
Second.
All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All opposed? Hearing none, motion carries. Thank you, Kara. Next item is 5C. Ann?
Sure. Good evening, Mayor and Council. As you know, we've been talking about, not only we, but a big majority of the Midwest has been talking about the emerald ash borer with its destruction of many ash trees within the metro area. So we've been trying to work out between trying to locate volunteers, utilizing a seasonal public works person to try to get an inventory of all our existing boulevard trees and park trees. And just have not had been real successful with getting that done. So we talked to a different two different firms within the metro area that have done emerald ash borer tree inventories and also management strategies that the city can use going forward. Ideally, what would happen with the inventory is they will inventory every boulevard tree and park tree that's in active areas. We wouldn't go out into some of our large outlots that are pretty forested or private property. So we'd be just looking at getting an inventory of what our existing trees are, condition of those trees. Then ultimately what happens is that they will provide an emerald ash borer strategy, management strategy to deal with all the ash trees that we do have within the community. In the early 2000s, just because of the nature of the tree, we were starting to see the fade out of the Dutch elm trees, or Dutch elm disease trees. The Dutch elm was a fast-growing tree, much like the ash tree was a wonderful tree that developers started putting in back in the early 2000s because of their ability to adapt to the soils we have here, and they were fast growers. So unfortunately, when those developments came in the early 2000s, we didn't have a really good number of number of trees, the types of trees that were going into these areas. So we have a real challenge with the number of trees that we're actually trying to manage as we go forward. So ideally what we'd like to do now is just move forward and have a firm do our inventory, provide us with a management plan that will also give us a spreadsheet of a budget that we'd be looking at for this management plan. It would cover 10 to 20 years out on not only what our strategy will be, whether that's trying to save some of these ash trees, some of the best management practices of moving forward. Do we cut them down? How do we cut them down? How do we replace them? So we'd have a full package, hopefully by next year, by next spring, moving forward. So we did solicit 2 quotes from S&S Tree Service and also Rainbow Tree Care, and they were based on actually a number of trees anticipated to be within those boulevards. So it's kind of a range of tree proposals or tree counts from between the 2 of them. So the Rainbow Tree Care came in at $32,750. S&S came in at $33,780. But just to have a little protection, ideally I would like to get up to a range of about $37,000, or we could go up to $37,000 in the event that we're finding more trees out in the community. So with that, I'm happy to entertain any questions.
2 quick questions. First, the condition is to determine whether or not any of these trees actually are suffering from an infestation or a disease?
Actually, it'll give the condition regardless of the type of tree it is. It'll be whether it's a maple, an oak. It'll give us a range of 0 to 4 of the condition. Yep, healthy.
Infected or not?
Yeah.
Okay, got
Yep.
it.
And we, just to note, we have not had any indication that we do have any infestation of the Dutch or the emerald ash borer. The closest we know to date is in Eden Prairie. So,
Second question is, have we looked at or should we look at, for all of the trees that the city has responsibility for, doing something to require trees that are not known to be susceptible to these kind of issues and
Yep.
hence avoid future problems?
yep, and we have started doing that now with the development agreements and landscaping plans and reviewing of them as development comes in. Some of the areas that really are challenges when we get the big outlots around the wetlands. We'll get an idea of what is existing in there. And moving forward, ideally, we'd like to look at the condition of those trees within the outlots themselves to reduce the opportunities of any diseased trees. So,
Got it. All right.
but I think it's just like anything else. It's like the trees will come and go, and there will be something that gets them, regardless of the trees that we get planted. So,
All right. Thank you. Council?
I've got a question. So the development agreements, typically we require boulevard trees to be installed by the developer. So clearly park trees are city trees, but who owns the boulevard trees and what is the responsibility? I mean, if it's not the city, if it's the landowner who purchases the home, do they also purchase the responsibility for the tree? And if the tree dies, what is their responsibility?
within the development agreements that we are moving forward with today, we're trying to make it the responsibility of the HOA and or the property owner. But prior to a couple years ago, the only one that I'm aware of that has that responsibility on the property owner or the association is Laketown. Prior to that, everything was city responsibility, and everything that I am aware of besides Laketown is city responsibility.
Thank you.
One of the challenges, too, just to kind of go off a little bit about that, is that, obviously all those trees need maintenance, pruning of some sort. And to try to get an HOA to do that or property owners to do that and do it properly has always been somewhat of a challenge too, so.
Do we, so piggybacking off that,
Yep,
do we guide council,
yes,
tutor in some way, help them understand what's needed? I mean, I'm assuming.
we try.
You're running equipment down sidewalks underneath trees
Well, and, yeah,
that have to be trimmed up,
streets, yeah,
et cetera, et cetera.
yep.
Is that effective?
In some cases, it has been. So we're always challenged with moving forward with that, but we're working on ways to communicate.
Great, thank you.
Yep.
Council, other questions?
Estimated time frame when the ash borer will get to Victoria?
I wish I could give you that.
I know you don't, no one knows, but I mean, somebody's guessing. Is it 3 years, 5 years, 10?
You know, we had a tiny scare this year. We thought we had it, and it turned out to not be the case. My real just guess, based on what I know from how it's tracking, 5 years max. I'm guessing, unless there's there could be control methods that come out that could change that direction. But so far, there has been nothing that's stopping it.
So this plan doesn't include actually treating the trees, or just inventorying them?
It would inventory. It will provide us with a management strategy on how to deal with the existing trees we have and the rough cost estimates, and that could include chemical injection of them. It'll depend on conditions and numbers, I think. So you'll have an opportunity to see what the costs are related to if we just cut them down as we move along, if we decide to inject. And there will be other, I'm sure that there's a lot of private property owners that have ash trees on their property that, we're going to want to consider as well as we move forward. I know several communities have done had a service available that if residents wanted to treat their trees chemically, that they'd get a better deal if we went in as a whole community. So,
Is there a reason we're doing this now and maybe not a couple of years from now?
I think that you're going to want to plan because there will be some costs associated with this, and potentially some very hefty ones. So I think moving ahead forward now and at least knowing what your liability potentially will be.
So my assumption then, from what your statement is, these treatment plans are an expensive proposition, assuming we have to implement something.
Yep.
Got it.
Yes.
All right. Council, other questions?
I think the expensive is a relative term. I'm seeing trees treated for like under $100 a tree that gives a protection for 2 to 3 years. So,
Yeah, and we're doing that actually within Lions Park. We've been treating, we've got about 20 to 25 ash trees within Lions Park, and we are now on our second round of treatment for them. And it's running about $1,500 to $2,000 per treatment.
that's pretty good.
Yeah.
Okay, any other comments? Okay, I move that we authorize Rainbow Tree Care to complete a boulevard and park tree management plan and emerald ash borer management strategy at a cost not to exceed $37,500. Is there a second?
Second.
All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All opposed? Hearing none, motion carries unanimously.
Thank you.
Yep, thank you, Ann. Kelly, next item is yours. 5C, Town Hall meeting.
Yes, Mayor Funk has scheduled a town hall meeting for this coming Thursday, October 11th, from 6 p.m. to 8 p.m., and a proposed agenda was sent out to council members and just on the city's website notification. After that went out, council member vote requested that this item be placed on the agenda to discuss the format and agenda of the meeting. Councilmember Crowley also expressed some concerns, so Attorney Bob O's has also provided some opinion. So with that, I suggest turning it over to Tom Vogt.
Go ahead.
Okay. The thing that caused concern in my head was the fact that 2 of the 4 candidates that are running for office had a prior commitment and can't make the town hall meeting, which based on the agenda, it looks like it's specifically designed to have the candidates talk and answer questions.
Oh, let me interrupt, please. That was not my intention. I can understand how you drew that assumption, but the intention was just to give the candidates 5 minutes to make a statement and then actually go to a town hall. But based on after the notice was provided, 2 candidates said they can't make it. I have no problem taking that off the agenda item. It was not designed, nor did I intend it to be a Q&A for candidates. It was simply a chance for them to give a statement. That's it. So based on that feedback, I don't want to interrupt you if you want further points, but I have no problem taking that off. That was my intent when I asked Cindy to invite the candidates.
Okay, that was the concern.
Okay, so unless there's objections from the council, we won't let any candidates make any statement. Go ahead.
So should we just amend this agenda?
Yeah, I think we just did. Council, any objections to taking line item 2 off the agenda?
I don't think the council really needs to voice an opinion on that. The mayor is within his rights to call a meeting and set the agenda. I think the council has expressed, or I know Councilmember Vogt did, as did I, a concern that this might pose a challenge from the city standpoint, and if the mayor is willing to change the agenda, I think that resolves it. Thank you.
Yep, you're welcome. Is council, any other questions on this item? Kelly, would you please have that removed, then line item 2 will leave the rest.
Yes.
All right, thank you. Council, unless there's any other questions, we'll move on. Okay, next item, 6A, Parking Task Force. As we get into these unfinished business items, I actually have a request to speak. First one, Sharon Eklund, you wanted to speak to this item?
Sharon Eklund, 1200 79th Street, and I had thought I would speaking in the open forum, but I guess this is appropriate at this point too. I was concerned because of the way that it was added to the agenda, and it was at the previous council meeting on Monday, September 24th. Just a quick addition. I initially learned of this after the fact via social media, and then proceeded to listen to the audio recording when it did become available. I then had confirmation of my dismissal because I am a candidate for city council in a conversation with Councillor Striegel on Wednesday, October 3rd, following the League of Women Voters forum here in council chambers. As I told Councillor Striegel, I had no formal notification of my dismissal from the Parking Task Force, and I was very confused as to why. Usually a dismissal is due to a downsizing or a wrongdoing of some other explainable reason. I didn't know if I was booted off because I was not qualified, if my capabilities were being questioned, or intelligence, or perhaps because I was a woman and being replaced by another man on the task force. I was the only woman present at the first meeting of the task force. I had phone calls, social media messages, and other communications from friends and family wondering why. My friend, who is a deputy clerk, called and had the same question. Why? If I had been notified previously, and then also, how can they do that without cause and or previous notification? I also question how this was added, approved, and accepted with no prior discussion and or knowledge of all council members. I also had a visit from Jim Paulson on Saturday morning, September 29th. He asked me if I knew why this was proposed by Councillor Striegel, added to the agenda, and voted 3 ayes, Councillor Striegel, Crowley, and Vogt, 1 no, Mayor Funk, and 1 abstained, Councillor Gregory, to boot me off, and he was appointed to fill the vacancy. Did I know why I was removed? He did not want the appointment. He did not volunteer for this. His name was never on the volunteer list, and he was angry and very disgusted. So I asked the council, is there a policy or procedure or ordinance that states a volunteer who is a candidate for an office cannot serve on a task force or a committee? And is there a legitimate reason for my dismissal from the parking task force? Or is it simply another way to exert the continued political control? Thank you.
Thank you. If you would, what I'd like to do is, I should have had Pat do an introduction first. So Pat, Sharon, if you would just sit down for a minute. Pat,
Okay.
if you would do the introduction. Did you have anything to add, or
No, but I could do an introduction for the people who are watching on TV.
just, yeah, because some people may not know what we're talking about. And then at that point, Sharon, if you want to come back up in council, you can interact with them. So I apologize. Pat, quick introduction for the rest that don't know.
Mayor, members of the City Council, back in August, the City Council appointed a 10-member downtown parking task force to look at the downtown parking supply and demands and provide recommendations to the City Planning Commission and City Council on possible city actions. Then last month, the City Council removed Sharon Eklund from the task force and appointed Jim Paulson. After the meeting, the staff received an email from Mr. Paulson saying that he was not interested in serving on the task force. The task force has met once already. We plan on meeting 2 more times, once on November 15th and again on December 12th. In the staff report, we listed the 5 volunteers that have expressed interest in being on the task force but were not appointed. Staff has recommended the City Council either make a motion to leave the task force at 9 members or appoint another resident to be on the task force.
All right, thank you, Pat. Sorry to skip you. Sharon, if you would come back up, and council, if you guys have questions, please feel free. Anybody have any questions?
I just want to make sure, I mean, if anybody else has anything they want to say, please feel free to go first.
All right.
If not, I just wanted to ask if, I mean, you and I spoke, hopefully it cleared the air. I think my statement at both the initial meeting when we appointed the task force, I made the statement at that time. You know, at that time you weren't a candidate and had support that wasn't just my own personal feeling, but there were others on the council that agreed that being in a position to make recommendations at the same time you're campaigning, and that's one of the issues that's been very alive in the campaign, felt it would be unfair to the candidates because you'd be asked a question you really can't answer ethically, and the others can. And then also, I was one of the first voices to support you at that time when you weren't a candidate. And so I just want to make sure that all of your questions, your concerns have been answered. I think I explained pretty clearly my reasoning, and we don't have to agree on the reasoning, but I want to make sure that there aren't any remaining questions in your mind about the intent of the motion that I made.
I guess I don't see the revelation between being a council candidate and bad information or whatever it is on the parking task force. I don't see any correlation between those two. Parking task force is simply a study of parking. And how can my being a candidate for city council impact
So
that?
the purpose, as I understand it, of the parking task force, and thank you for raising the question, I do want to make sure that there isn't anything remaining on the table when we're done here. But the purpose of the parking task force is, I understand it has several aspects. One is to understand if there's a parking problem and the magnitude of it. Based on that, then what is the remedy and who will pay for it? And so those are fairly significant issues that will face future councils in terms of planning where something should go and how to pay for it and who should pay for it. And so knowing that, because this has been a hot topic for probably at least 2 or more years, it's probably always been a topic, but it's really become a prime topic in the last 2 plus years. As a member of the parking task force, you're going to be asked to objectively gather information and form a recommendation to the council for how to proceed. And as a candidate, you're going to be asked, what is your policy? How do you think we should solve the downtown parking problem? And I think you have been asked that, correct, by the League of Women Voters and the
Or
local
Q&As,
newspapers.
yes.
So to me, those two things seem in conflict. And in order for you to be on a level playing field with the other candidates who can answer openly, because they have no voice in that recommendation process, it just seemed, and again, consistent with my statement that I made the night we made the initial selection, is that it's inconsistent for somebody to be both a candidate and on a body that's developing new policy. I hope that clarifies it. I don't know any other way I can say it.
Well,
And we may not agree,
yeah,
but that's
no.
my logic.
And that's an opinion. I'm one of
It
9,
is.
is it, on the task force? 1 of 10.
Actually, they appointed 10 members, yes.
Okay.
Okay, that's the answer, and we don't necessarily have to agree, but I just want to make sure that at least it's clear why I took that position.
Okay, so I'm officially dismissed then.
That's a decision of the council. I'm not unilaterally doing anything.
So at this point, why doesn't the council take up the discussion? Thank you,
Okay,
Sharon.
thank you.
Councilmember Gregory?
Yeah, thank you. First of all, Sharon, apologize for this. I agree with you. I don't think you should have been removed. We've certainly had members on Planning Commission, Park and Rec, those committees, commissions that have been sitting members and still run for council. We've never kicked anybody off a commission or a committee. Sharon was duly elected. She was duly elected prior to her running for office, which is really no different than a sitting planning commission, which happened in 2016 when Derek Gunderson was a sitting member on the planning commission, and he ran for office, and you three didn't kick him off. And the planning commission makes recommendations and those types of things, just as the Park and Rec would, or the parking task force. So personally, I think she should be back on there, but if that was the council decision, I'm ready to move forward. We put together a process. We put a process in place on how we were going to select these members, and that process included we were going to select 3 members, and we invited the public to put their name in the ring if they wanted to be on this task force. And through that process, we ended up with 9 people, 9 residents that wanted to be selected for this group. On 8/13, we had a meeting, and this council elected. We had an election for the members, and through that process, we elected 3 members, and Sharon was certainly one of them. Subsequently, Sharon's been kicked off, so now we're left with 6 members, that are 6 residents that had signed up and weren't selected in that process. Paul Hepperle has already been removed from this list, so we're left with 5. Of those 5 members, or residents, through the election process, 3 of those members received votes from this council. Those 3 members are Mark Schneider, Joe Doherty, and Vince Baudette. The other 2 members did not receive any votes. So if we're going to continue with this democratic type process, which I think we should, those 3 members each received 2 votes from the council. So they tied. So the 3 members, those 3 individuals, tied as runners-up to fill this seat. So in my opinion, we should be selecting from those 3 individuals that were runners-up in this process. And since they tied, a lot of times for elections, if 2 members tie in an election, you have a flip of a coin. We have 3 members that tied, and I would suggest these 3 individuals draw straws. Whichever one wins that contest gets that seat. If we were to bypass this and throw this whole election process out the window and start all over, that's just not the way we run elections. You don't like the results of an election, you can't just throw out the results and have another election. We've already had an election. These 3 members each got 2 votes, and they should be selected. If we go outside of that and pull a member just out of the hat for the majority of this council wants somebody else, that's not a very democratic process, and I could not support that. I think if you did that, I think you're going to taint the process and make it more political than it needs to be. And I think if you do that, you're going to delegitimize the results, any suggestions coming from this task force. So I'm going to go ahead and make that motion that we allow Mark Schneider and Joe Doherty and Vince Baudette to draw straws, and whichever one is selected through that process is the 10th member on this council, on this parking task force.
I'll second that motion. Discussion?
Discussion is that I would have thoughts otherwise, completely different than Council Member Gregory's, and a different solution. So,
Go ahead. What?
And so I guess I come back to, before the motion was made, I was going to ask Mr. Gregory to make a recommendation, and I guess that was made in the form of a motion. My question is why we didn't go back and have Ms. Eklund be the member, and
that's the approach I was going to suggest.
well, and so here's my thought behind this, and so the reasoning discussion that impacted me during this process was the comment that in the original voting, it was determined that anyone that was a candidate would not be brought forth for nomination. And there was another candidate that was, and I understand, Ms. Eglin, at the time you were not, but you filed, I guess, the next day. I was in a similar situation when I ran from a candidate standpoint and on a committee, but I was allowed to maintain that membership until I actually took office. And so if we want to go back and add Ms. Eklund to this task force, I am willing to do that. I would support that under the with the understanding that should she be elected, she would have to resign when she takes office. And I see no conflict in that.
Councilmember Gregory, would you be willing to withdraw your motion based on that discussion?
I would. The dates the task force is going to be meeting, once in November and once in December, is that correct?
That's correct.
So
January.
It's actually been set for November 15th and December 12th, the next two
I see.
meetings.
Changed.
So this task force is going to be completed before the new council is seated.
Correct, right?
There's a very good chance they may meet another time in January, but it's been scheduled for those two meetings and wrap up by the end of the year.
So
I will withdraw my motion.
I move that we reappoint Sharon Eklund to the Parking Task Force. Is there a second?
Second.
Discussion?
So I can go either way on this. I just want to make a couple points. So first of all, it's not really fair to Mr. Hepperle either, because he was disallowed at that point because he was a stated candidate. We can't really unring this bell, so we don't really know how that would turn out had we not had that decision and that discussion in the beginning. Mr. Crowley wasn't even available that evening to participate in the meeting, and so, his voice hasn't been in any of this up to this point. And as I recall,
Excuse me, didn't he vote in the 24 September? Or what?
He
meeting?
wasn't in the initial meeting.
Oh, in the initial, okay, I'm sorry, thank
That
you.
we appointed, and therefore the initial discussion
Got it.
about candidates being on there. But then also, I believe that Ms. Paradise wasn't even considered because we already had 3 names picked before, and it was just sort of luck of the draw, the order of the names on the list. We went from the top down, and I don't think she even got considered or even got voted on, and it was simply we already had 3 picked, so she never even got a shot at it.
I believe she was,
And
sorry, but I
but-
believe she was removed because she was a business owner. Isn't that correct, Pat?
That was my recollection.
She was actually on both columns, you're right. She was under the business owners, but then she's also a resident.
So she wasn't removed because she was a business owner, because we have business owners on it. She was just duplicated on two
Right,
different
and-
lists.
So at the point where we were only considering people as at-large residents. We already had selected some business owners, we had already selected council members, and we were just trying to fill out the roster with the residents. And she was listed as a resident, but didn't get considered as a resident because we had already filled the 3 spots. So, again, I can go either way on this, but
Okay, council, further discussion? If not, we have a valid motion to reinstate Sharon Eklund onto the parking task force. All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All opposed? Hearing none, motion carries. Ms. Eklund, you're back on the parking task force. Next item, retaining wall issue. Kelly?
Okay, Mayor Funk requested that the city council consider paying $5,500 towards the construction of a retaining wall that would be located on the property line between 2506 Woods Drive and 2514 Woods Drive. So you may recall we had some pictures at a prior meeting showing the significant grading difference between the two properties. Staff has discussed this. Kara, Pat, and I talked about it extensively. We also brought Bob into the discussion to talk about this, and the precedent it could set, and the whether or not it was something the city should be paying for. So the staff consensus was that it is a private property issue, as the builder of the first lot did not grade according to the plat. So with that, we would bring it up for council discussion to debate this.
All right, thank you. Before council discussion, can you bring up the photos that show, because the last time we did this, the video and audio wasn't working. So this is the two homes. And before we get into the council discussion, one of the homeowners is here, Chase, and he'd like to address the council. Chase, name and address for the record, please.
Chase Rydberg, 2506 Woods Drive.
Which one do you own? The one on the left or the one on the right?
The one on the right.
Okay,
on the
thank
east side.
new one.
Thank you.
Yeah, everything's fairly new, but the newest.
Thank you.
Well, thank you all for what you do. I know being in this position, you can't keep everybody happy, and I've sat on a board for nearly a decade, and I don't wish to do anything like that again. So I don't envy you guys. My wife and I moved in end of January of this year, and we waited quite a long time to get our yard. And part of that had to do with the fact that the grading didn't match with our neighboring lots. Finally, our builder decided to just give us our grade, which is what you see here, and we finally got our grass just this last month. I was okay with that. I didn't have to mow all of the summer, but my wife and our twins that are less than 2 years old, not so much. She's not so pleased. And I normally help out with bath time and bedtime tonight, and so the fact she told me to come to this meeting tells you how important it is to us that we see this issue get resolved. So we have most of our sod now, but not a section along that wall based on the fact that something has to be done with it. It's my understanding, after hearing many different sides to the story of how this came to be, after many delays from the city just to respond to us, or to our builder, for what happened and what the resolution would be, I just have to say it's disappointing to hear a response from the city saying, well, we approved both, but it's not our problem. Well, it kind of is. I mean, you have to use some common sense in saying the city's job is to approve these grading plans. And clearly, the city's already made that statement, and correct me if I'm wrong in making that as a fact, that both of these were approved. I don't know any city that would approve both of these. In fact, it's kind of embarrassing when we have landscapers and contractors over wondering, what's the story behind this? How could this even happen? And I have to tell them that I don't even know. I'm new to Victoria. I didn't know these types of issues could even happen. I came from Minnetonka, and I know most cities in the metro have procedures and processes in place to prevent these types of disputes. This isn't a dispute between two homeowners. Myself and my neighbor weren't the ones that graded these lots. In fact, we can't even prove how this happened because according to what I saw on the agenda, and I apologize, I didn't print it out and bring it with me, that some files can't even be located according to our neighbor's lot with the city. Now, how can something not even be located? That's a very basic thing for a city to maintain our records. So if those records can't be located and the city can't prove what exactly happened, who pays for it exactly? Does the incoming taxpayer, the citizen, pay for it? Or does the city take responsibility and admit that something clearly was done wrong and make it right? Yeah, I understand. You're going down a territory where you agree to pay out an amount of money to fix a problem, and now everyone comes to you. But where's the responsibility of the city to do their job and be held accountable for when stuff like this happens? Because if the city did their job, I don't believe this would happen. And if I'm wrong in the city having a process to make sure that simple grading of lots is done correctly, by all means, correct me. I'd be happy to understand that. It would be disappointing, though, because that should be missing from the procedures of any city allowing homes to be built. So I'm asking respectfully that the city take responsibility of this. Don't put this on the private homeowners, because I can assure you that while we're not responsible for that fence, that wall is already crumbling. And with the amount of rain we're getting this week, it's only going to get worse. What happens when that fence comes down? Now that liability has grown. So we're talking about less than $6,000. What is the cost to the city if further damage is done and then people start pointing the finger? Now, I'm not on the hook. I know that. But what about my neighbor? What about all the damage that could be done? What happens when our builder just gets frustrated and sods up to the property line, and then later that has to get replaced after finally someone does something? So the exposure only grows more and more. And I think this is something that I really urge you all to think about this. I understand the legal advice. Attorneys are attorneys. They're going to tell you what they think. But what's right for the city and the taxpayers? What should the city be doing and enforcing to ensure this doesn't happen? Because like I said, I've had contractors and landscapers from outside of Victoria come in, and they're completely blown away by this. It's embarrassing. I don't want to think of my own city of being less than competent to prevent these types of issues. But I think what really irks myself and my family is the fact that the city dragged their feet, and then came back and said, it's not our problem. And if I'm mistaken and that was the response, I'm hearing this through our builder, but the recommendation kind of speaks for itself that the city's not willing to take any responsibility in this matter. So I'm really asking you guys to look at the big picture on this, because it does set a different type of message if the city wants to stay completely out of this and let it blow up into potentially a larger issue, which I don't want to see. And I'm just going to be a bystander watching it happen. But most of all, there should be something to prevent this from even happening in the first place. I mean, I've never personally encountered this.
All right. Thank you, Chase. Before you sit down, and before the council discusses this, council, any questions for Chase? All right, seeing none. Thank you.
Yep. Thank you.
At this point, let's start the council discussion.
Excuse me, Mr. Mayor.
Yep.
Mr. Gentleman.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Can I come up and speak?
Yeah, sure.
Okay.
Name and address for the record, please.
Scott Lair, 2468 Woods Drive. I'm just down the street, but I'm also the builder of the house on the left, president of Greenwood Design Build. It is a tough one. I'll be the first to admit, because we work in a lot of cities, and we can all sit here and point fingers at each other, and the homeowners and I, and we've all met out there. We'll say we graded that lot not like that. We graded it per the grading plan. But we don't have proof of that other than some photos and some random, we can show it, but a lot of cities require they call it an as-built survey, which means we get done, you give us our final, we give us our CO, which is our certificate of occupancy, which means we can move in. We have a surveyor go out there and he shoots all the heights and says, yep, looks like the grading plan. we're going to say we graded it per the grading plan. The homeowner hired a landscaper to come in, do a fence, do a pool in the backyard, and I'm friends with the homeowner, so I don't feel comfortable trying to say, you know, the homeowner did this. I'm not trying to throw him under the bus. I'm just saying what you have doesn't work. You need an as-built. I think it's in the books the way you have it, but nobody's
it's not
enforcing
being
it.
enforced?
Yeah, well, yeah, it's probably $500. Nobody's going to do it unless you enforce it. You didn't enforce it. We have a certificate of occupancy. We moved them in. They built later. The inspector went out there, looked at the grading, said, yep, looks great. We don't think it looked like that, but here we are. I mean,
Got it. Thank
so
you.
short of you guys agreeing to pay for the retaining wall, it'll be the homeowners and all of us will just start suing each other, so.
So, thank you. Before we get to council discussion, council, any questions?
Mayor, I have a question,
Yep.
if I may. You know more about this than I do, that's for sure.
Well, I don't know about
The
that,
language
but
of the code refers to the city has the authority to ask for a certificate of grading.
yes.
That's the language used in the code. I
They don't-
understand that not to be an as-built. I understand that to just be a representation by you or the developer that the grading was done in accordance with the plan. So I don't understand that to be an as-built, but
I don't
you know more about
know
this.
that they require either. I don't know that I've seen any requirement for, to me, a certificate of grading is an as-built. I think it's the same thing, but I don't know that that's true or not.
Okay.
I wouldn't sign off on something unless it was, a surveyor said it was right, so.
So, but you've said that had the city, and I don't know what records the city has, and I don't know to the resident to.
Probably a visual.
Gentleman that lives next door, I don't know about dragging feet and lost records, I haven't heard about that, but
Yeah, no.
to the extent the city would have asked for a certificate of grading, I guess you're saying you would have said that it was graded properly, that's what you've indicated, right?
It would end a verbal, but the only way to prove that would be what's called an as-built survey, so.
Well, but wouldn't that have proved that you did it right? You
Yeah,
just said you did it
absolutely,
right?
yeah,
Okay,
yes.
well, okay,
Yes.
fair enough.
So do we know, Pat, do you know, Kara, go ahead.
So, the mayor requested of Doug that staff complete a kind of analysis of what the history was on this and what we could find about what went wrong. So there's just a couple of things that I want to note.
Let me interrupt. You can go ahead. I don't want
No,
to make you
I
just
can,
stand
if you have
there.
questions, no, I'm good, yeah, if it's up to you, yeah.
We'll bring you back up if
Okay,
we've
all
got
right, thank
questions. I'm sorry, Kara, go ahead.
That's okay. So, as noted in the staff report and shown on this slide, this is the ordinance language that currently exists relating to the requirement to have a certificate of grading submitted for each lot prior to the issuance of a certificate of occupancy. And I find it notes that the approval of such is supposed to be by the city engineer. But in the time I've worked here, that's not something the city has ever historically requested be completed by my department. What Pat and I were able to conclude was that Ben and Aaron, prior to their departure, had started requiring the submittal of as-built surveys in, I don't know, bunch of different developments where there were maybe more difficult circumstances or some grading issue potential, so they were requiring them. But in the time I've worked here prior to that, there hasn't been a process by the city to receive, you know, you're talking about a couple hundred a year, depending on how many building permits you receive, and then have a review completed. What else would you note? Just that Aaron and Ben had been doing it most recently.
Right. They've been doing it. They weren't covering 100% of them, like Kara mentioned. They were trying to figure out which ones were going to cause a problem. And then since their departure, we've been kind of getting a stack of them.
Yeah, and so at the next council meeting, we'll be having a workshop to talk about what the staffing implications or funding implications are if we are going to start completing these reviews on every lot. This issue is not an uncommon one, so I just included some random photos from different neighborhoods around the city, but it isn't uncommon to have lots with different elevations, and oftentimes you'll see a wall constructed between the two lots. And one of the things that staff's been noting is that now that we've reduced our side yard setbacks, some of these potential grading issues between lots, we're seeing more of those issues. So up until this point, up until relatively recent past, so the last couple years, the city wasn't enforcing this ordinance of requiring the certificate of grading. The other thing that doesn't exist in our process, they talked about there being a site inspection for the grading. That isn't something that the city currently does. So there, prior to certificate of occupancy, somebody from staff doesn't go out and actually walk the lot and look at the grading. That would be a requirement above and beyond what this language speaks to in the ordinance. So that isn't something that's happened to date. So the staff report noting that we couldn't find the files, there's no record of us requiring or receiving a certificate of grading for the lot in question. So the files are all in order. We have them all electronically, but that wasn't a requirement placed on this lot. So it isn't a matter of the files being missing.
It wasn't a requirement. You mean it wasn't an expectation.
Right.
The ordinance had a certificate of grading requirement that wasn't enforced.
Correct. It wasn't enforced uniformly, and I think the reason why Ben and Aaron weren't required of all is just the workload. Getting over 100 of these certificate of surveys and reviewing all of them. They are trying to figure out which ones may cause problems in reviewing those.
All right, thank you. Since I brought this to the council, I'd like to start the rest of the discussion. I think it's clear to everybody that this ordinance needs to be reviewed and adjusted. I'm not in favor of requiring an as-built on every lot, especially lots that clearly wouldn't need one. But based on when you've got a certain slope, and I don't want to sit here and decide that issue other than it's clearly in the ordinance. We clearly didn't do it in this case, and it clearly caused a problem. When I met with the homeowners and the builders numerous times, they relayed to me that basically the city said, sorry, this is your problem, not ours. That to me, I don't think is the appropriate response. We're supposed to be here for our residents. This is something that the ordinance required. Now, I can understand why it happened. I can understand that this has identified an issue that needs to be resolved with a change in the ordinance. And I'm fine with the staff going and looking at this and trying to find a reasonable solution so we're not having developers pay $500 for this, assuming that's the cost per lot, for lots that don't need it. But the flip side of the coin is we can't let this happen to others and end up in this situation. So in talking with the owners and talking with the builders, I tried to find if there was some common ground where we could find a solution. They sent me a quote. If we could bring the, here it is. There's various walls here, and I can understand that the homeowners would want a if you will, an upgraded wall, either a block wall or a boulder wall. I told them I understand that the problem, it's my opinion that the city should do something, but the city needs to be responsible to our taxpayers. So I thought the appropriate solution, the timber wall would fix the problem and give a clean break. And when I spoke with the homeowners and the builders, I said, if you guys want to upgrade that and you'll pay the difference, I will bring that to the council for review and action as the council sees fit. So what I'm asking, I think it's appropriate. I think we have, whether it's legal liability or not, to me is less important than the fact that we created this problem by having these gaps in the ordinances. And I think the appropriate thing to do and the right thing to do is say, look, we'll pick up the timber wall. The homeowners and the builders need to pick up anything above that. If we need to get other quotes, I'd be fine with that. But more importantly, we fix the ordinance so we don't have to do it again. Now, with that said, I'm not aware of any other places in the city where this is happening. If in fact this opens the city up to 20 other places where we have to do something and we need to look at that before this is approved, I'd be fine with tabling this item to look at potential liability for the city. But barring that, I think we should take action on this tonight, solve this problem for the homeowners, and fix the ordinances so we never have the problem again, so we don't create this problem. With that, let me turn it over to the council for comments.
I have a question, and just, Mr. Bose, what are the legal ramifications of this?
Well, Mayor and Council, I guess I always say, I've said multiple times before on things like this, I'm always asked, are we setting a precedent? Precedent's a legal term that refers to being bound, a governmental body or a court being bound by a decision made today. And you don't really ever in a zoning or in a land use context set precedents because the facts are always different from lot to lot, from development to development. So to the question, if the council elected to make a payment here, is the council then going to be legally bound to make payments everywhere else where this situation is similar? The answer is no. That's part one of the answer. Part two of the answer is, I am concerned, though, having said all of that, I'm concerned by the view that the city is responsible for this problem. That obviously goes beyond fixing this problem. That refers to any time there are two lots that are not graded in a way that is compatible, that because the city has the right to check the grading, that the city's responsible for the grading. That's legally incorrect. That may be the view of the council, that you want to, in this case, make a payment to make this particular problem go away, but the city is not legally responsible for grading these lots. The city doesn't do the grading. The city approves a grading plan, which I understand in this case was approved. There was a grading plan approved, and then the developer or builder is responsible, legally responsible, for grading the lot to that grade. There is no way that that responsibility gets shifted to the city based on the city's right to check the developer's work. It's true that the city has the right, as some cities, not all, but some cities have a mechanism in place to check developers' work. That doesn't make the city liable or responsible for the grading of the lots. The developer is responsible for that, or the builder in this case. So I'm a little concerned about, I'm not concerned if the council wants to help the citizens here with this particular problem. You're not going to set a precedent, but it's not correct to say that the city caused this problem or is legally responsible for it. I don't agree with that.
Thank you. And so thinking through and trying to figure out what's the right thing to do here. And as I say this, I still haven't made my mind up. I don't know yet. I tried to come up with an analogy, and the only one I can come up with is, all right, we're an auto manufacturer and we're responsible to have safety for a vehicle. And there are certain standards that the government puts out that says you have to meet. And we find out, lo and behold, 2 years after the vehicle has been sold and been driving, that it doesn't meet something. And it's the manufacturer's responsibility to do a recall and fix that. Right? We're not the manufacturer. We're the government entity that said you must do that. And so I walked through that entire logic process, and I don't know that that's right in this case either. So I'm interested in learning and understanding the rest of the council's opinions.
One question, this is a problem was caused because these are custom-built homes and every lot has their own developers?
No, so the development is Wasserman Lake Woods. That was constructed in 2014 and 2015 by the development team of Peter Knably and Matt Pavick. So that developer would have mass graded all the lots, so provides general grading, creates the house pads, and then a builder comes in and builds the lots according to the development grading plan that was approved. In this case, we have a developer and then two different builders. These types of things do come up. I can't envision in my brain, I don't recall a situation where it was as dramatic as this, where a wall was needed. What typically happens is more of a drainage issue, where they don't grade the swale properly. And it's not like a dozen times a year, but a few times a year I get called out onto a site where two homeowners are having a problem because the lot line wasn't graded correctly between the two lots. And they're trying to figure out if it's the city's responsibility to come in and fix it. And typically we say, you know, this is an issue between the two property owners to work out. In most of our developments, though, we have Lennar is the developer, Lennar is the builder of house one, Lennar is the builder of house two. They got to fight amongst themselves to solve who's going to build the wall, who isn't going to build the wall. You know, this is just a bit more unique for Victoria because we have different builders.
Kara, I recall, and thank you for bringing that up, but I recall a particular situation in that, and it was Lennar, but they had the city out on Red Oak for a drainage issue between two homes. And what was the resolution of that? Do you recall?
I don't recall that specific one. You know, typically we'll provide some technical recommendations for how they might resolve it, but typically we leave it to the builder to work out with the
So
homeowner.
there was a drainage tile installed, but that wasn't done by the city.
Correct. Yeah. That often they'll come in after the fact and put in drain tile at the developer's expense to work through some of those drainage issues.
I should add one point too. Part of my discussions with the builders and the homeowners too is I told them there would probably be a requirement that if the council were to approve this, that they would have to sign some sort of a quit claim deed is not the right term, but the right kind of agreement so that the city's future liability for maintenance or anything else is null and void. And from that point forward, it's the homeowners for any replacement or future maintenance, that the city, if the council chose to do anything, would be limited to this one time only. Given the circumstances, I still believe that this is the right thing to do. I understand the attorney's comments, and I don't disagree with that. But I think the fact that we, as the city, had the requirement, we issued the certificate of occupancy, and I'm still not quite clear whether we actually inspected it. It doesn't sound like we inspected it. And we ended up, this is not just a drainage issue, which I don't think the city should have to resolve. This is clearly, from standing out there, I went out there numerous times. I never took a tape measure to it, but at the height, I think it's roughly 3.5 feet as far as a drop from one yard to the other. That's a significant oops, right? And so I'm in favor of one time fixing this, and more importantly, what this is fixing the ordinance so that we avoid repeats of this situation. So to me, this is a unique instance, unique circumstances, and back to the attorney's point, any sort of an agreement would encapsulate that and do whatever we can to avoid any other future potential liability for the city, and also avoid any future maintenance costs with this. And I just think it's the right thing to do. We should do this for the residents. We shouldn't tell them it's their problem. Council?
So I haven't formed a position on this yet, but I do have some questions and want to make a couple of points. So first of all, there's a development agreement, right, that is signed that says this is what I'll do and this is what you'll do between the city, the builder, whatever.
City and developer, not the builder.
Okay. So is the final grade the responsibility of the developer or the builder?
So they both share responsibilities. So the developer has a responsibility to grade the site in accordance with the development grading plan. They're required to submit an as-built survey. They submitted one. We reviewed it. It appeared like it, and it's like this big plan with hundreds of shots on it. So you're looking at it for general conformance, that swales are in the right place. We don't go out and then verify their shots to make sure that the elevations they put on there correctly. So that all happened in this project. It then fell apart when we got to the builder
So
point.
the requirement is there, and by not inspecting it at the end, is that the same as removing the requirement, or is it just simply saying we relied on the report and the data to be accurate and compliant, and therefore we don't have to check everything in order to be doing our job as the city? Is that correct?
Yeah, so when the building permit comes in, they submit a certificate of survey that tells us how the builder plans to grade the lot. I pulled that for this first home. That matched the development plan. So the plan they had was correct.
Okay.
So what didn't happen then was any sort of as-built survey or verification that it was graded properly, and then it gets compounded further by a pool permit coming in.
We'll come back to that.
That doesn't get checked.
We'll come back to that. So again, by the agreement says that in issuing the certificate of occupancy, the builder, everybody who's responsible, whoever that is saying it meets what we said it would meet in terms of grading and other aspects, correct?
Do you agree with that?
Say that question again. Sorry.
When we issue the certificate of occupancy, are we saying that we checked everything, or are we saying that here's the certificate of occupancy based on the fact that the parties responsible for doing the work are telling us that it was done per the agreement?
So my understanding of how the city operated before I started working here is that the building official would issue the certificate of occupancy once the building met the building code requirements, and I believe also that the driveway was paved. Those were like the two requirements to get the CO.
Okay. And I guess I haven't heard anything compelling that says the ordinance is wrong. It sounded to me more like enforcement might be the gap, but I guess I'd like to hear the staff's opinion of that. I mean, I want to know, what problem are we trying to solve here? Was there a grading plan that came with there had to be a permit for the pool, correct? A separate permit for that?
Correct. That gets issued another permit, but our pool permit requirements don't require a surveyor to produce a grading plan.
So maybe that's where the gap is?
So
I don't know,
I can-
but I guess my point is, if I can just finish here.
Finish.
I just want to make sure that we know what problem we're trying to solve here and not just racing out and blaming the ordinance if it's an enforcement issue. And
Generally, staff feels that requiring as-built surveys and having a means to review them and follow up on them is appropriate, particularly given the fact that we're doing larger homes on lots with smaller side yard setbacks. We intend to bring that forward at the next workshop with some ideas about how we might cover that work and what the financial implications might be for feedback from the council to see what we all think about it.
okay, thank you. And then the last part is just that in terms of either, making some kind of a judgment call lot to lot, which ones we do or which ones we don't. Looking at these pictures, the lot grades don't seem so severe that I'd look at that one and go, oh yeah, we've got to have it here. And so that's part of, the question is, how do you know when enough is enough? And part of it's just a judgment call, right? I don't want to mow a steep hill. You could do those without a retaining wall, right?
Correct. And typically, the city doesn't require these walls, and these walls aren't on the grading plan of the development. They come in after the fact, once the house gets placed on the house pad, and oftentimes the property owner will be saying to the developer, I don't want a 3-to-1 slope, I want a wall, and then there's some negotiation for whether the builder's paying for the wall or the homeowner's paying for the wall. We're not a party to those. That's just my understanding from conversations with different property owners over the years, but.
Okay. Thank you.
I have a couple comments.
Real quick, let me address something, and then I'll turn it over to you. If you could go back to the two pictures, please. Thank you. I did look at, to Mr. Striegel's point, I did go out, and when I met with the builders and the homeowners a number of times, one of the things we did discuss is whether or not, when they put the pool in, did they excavate the dirt, and is that where this difference came from? And the home on the left was built and completed, and Chase, correct me if I'm wrong, that was including the pool before your house was built, and your house is the one on the right. Okay. As best we could tell, and as best I could tell, the amount of dirt volume that had to be excavated to put the pool in could not have caused this problem. Now, I wasn't there, I didn't see that, but just if you do some rough measurements, there's no way that enough dirt was taken out to cause this. So I don't think the pool was the root cause. And to clarify, I think the ordinance isn't wrong, it's just we're not enforcing it. And I don't want developers to spend all of this money for every lot, as I mentioned earlier. But if the ordinance says that, we need to adjust that to put in whatever staff comes up with as far as recommendations to do it when there's some appropriate reason to do it, with the intent of let's avoid these repeat situations in the future, right? I don't want to stick homeowners with this. And even if the city isn't liable, I feel that we've got some culpability because we didn't do that inspection. So, Councilmember Vogt.
Let's look at different pictures here. First of all, I think we have an ordinance that needs to be wordsmithed, but we do have the ordinance, it's just not executed. Let's look at this picture on the left. You can see the foundation of the house shows about 2.5 feet in height before the siding. That's normal. So basically, this house was put in perfectly. You could assume there was some thickness added for sod and maybe some topsoil, but it's pretty close to, there was nothing happened here with the grading when the house was built. And you could look, going up the side, it looks like that difference changes a little bit, but it's still there. So is the developer grade according, when that's inspected or agreed on, the house is not there, is that true? It's just the lots?
That's correct. And the elevations are held down a couple of feet so that when the foundation can get built, the builder can lose the soil on the site and not have to haul it off.
Okay,
So they're not, it'll be down, depending on the developer, 2 to 3 feet below what the final elevation is.
So the house on the left looks like everything was normal. There's nothing odd about it. I know there was something with a pool behind the house. So it's very difficult for me to understand how, if this lot was graded properly, there could be such a fall off. And the plan considered that okay.
I obviously wasn't on the site when the builder finished grading, and I wasn't there when the pool went in, so I want to be somewhat careful about how I phrase this. But based on my review of the information that we have relative to the surveys, this match point, this builder should have been tying into a grade down here and would have been in a situation where they would have either had a 2-to-1 slope or would have been constructing a wall
Okay, so
like we see here.
Keep those pictures. In the past 10 years, I've walked almost every neighborhood in Victoria. These kind of problems are all over the place. So this has been happening for years.
Well, and it's our elevation. So if you,
Right.
any street that has any sort of steep grade on it, the houses are stepping down in elevation from the high point down to the low point. So the way you tie those grades in between is either by super steep slopes or retaining walls.
Well, it seems to me this was a perfect storm. You had some differences in grading that were part of the grading plan, possibly, but you had multiple developers, you had multiple contractors. Did we have one developer or 2 developers?
One developer, 2
2
builders
Two builders,
who aren't the developers.
plus you have landscapers. So this is a perfect storm. So to me, everybody's got to be looking out for everybody else, because is the city the referee on this to make sure nothing ever happens? For $6,300, if we could get a hold harmless that says we're not going to do this again.
Yeah, ours is only $5,500.
Well, for $300 more, you get a block wall, so let's not fool around with the wood. I mean, to me, we could take care of this, but this is very common. This is not uncommon. I can tell you as a resident of Victoria since 2002, you want me to walk with you? Let's get a tablet and write down how many times this occurs. So everybody in this whole situation has got to be really alert. And if it ended up this way, then it just, communications broke down. The solution probably at this juncture is the wall, and probably there should be some drain tile, because there's going to be a drainage problem. Water's going to be coming at your house. You better, expected. So it's a matter of whether we think the city has any reason to be generous. I think, let's do a good deed and take care of this and get an agreement that we can't do this again, we can't afford to, because it's going to happen again. And let's start having a more rigorous process in the inspection department. The problem we have is we've got an ordinance, but we don't have a policy of what the people in the inspection department are supposed to be doing. If they're making exceptions, it should be documented. We can make exceptions, save money for everyone. You don't want to charge every homeowner another $500 for their house. But we should have a documented policy on how the inspections department decides to do this and that they do it. And then if we need more people, let's hire them. If this is a priority, it's either not a priority and this keeps happening and there's all kinds of disgruntled new homeowners, or we have to buck up. And as usual, to do things right costs money.
Mr. Mayor, may I ask another question?
Yep, feel free.
And thank you, Councilmember Vogt. Your discussion here, or your statements actually triggered another memory. Kara, I'm thinking back 4 years ago or so, and I think Ann may have been there too. It was a council session that was held at the Public Works facility just after it was opened, and there was a discussion about a new development along Lake Minnetonka on 7 and an issue with drainage and who's going to put the drain pipe in, and we resolved it by saying we'll do this only once. And the concern was that the city would then have to own and maintain the drainage tile for years to come, and I think the decision that night was that providing we have no obligation to maintain it, to Councilmember Vogt's statement, hold harmless statement agreement, the council voted to pay for that drainage tile. Is that right? Am I recalling that correctly?
I remember everything except for the outcome. I can picture the meeting, I could tell you where the drain tile is, but does that sound right to you, Ann?
Yeah, so I'm 90% sure, I'm 100% sure that council agreed to pay for it because I voted in favor of it. And I guess given that precedent, I would be willing to support Councilmember Vogt and what he just stated.
All right, can we get up the quote, please? Is there a resolution that was drafted?
Just a motion.
All right, I move we approve expenditure of $5,500 towards construction of a retaining wall on the property line between 2506 Wood Drive and 2514 Wood Drives, along with the appropriate legal document as determined by the city attorney to release the city from any further liability once this is built. Is there a second?
Second.
Discussion?
Discussion would be is nobody builds wood retaining walls anymore. And for $400, where are the quotes? We have between $5,900 and $6,300, you get a block wall. So for $400, give them a block wall.
I disagree. I think we're a little bit out over our skis right now with $5,900. I can find a way to justify that in my mind, and we've already got agreement from them that they'll cover any differences if they're interested in
Okay, I accept the fact I'm out of my skis.
No. I didn't mean that personally.
No.
Let's clarify something. The quote here says $5,940. Can we go back to the motion, please? This was $5,500. Is
That was the amount you had in your email.
oh, okay. So I'm going to withdraw that motion so that I can remake it. Any objection, council? All right, let's 5940. Let's go back to the motion, please.
Mayor, while you're making your motion, can I ask one question of staff?
Yes.
And I'm thinking about drafting that release. Has staff verified, we know that the property on the left in the pictures is high relative to the grading plan, not that the property on the right is low relative to the grading plan?
We haven't independently verified it, but the builder of the house on the right has provided some elevation information that shows that the property line on the high side is high
Okay.
compared to what the
And
grading
I'm just
plan
thinking we
should have
probably
been.
want that release to be from both property owners since we can't.
Right, part of the agreement was everybody had to sign off on this.
Can I ask a question too? So is it the council's intent that we would then be writing a check to them and they would be facilitating the construction of the wall, or are we facilitating the construction of the wall?
I think they need to do it, and submit a invoice, if you will, to the city, and the city manager can take care of that.
Does this require a permit to put in a rock wall?
No, anything over 4 feet does, and this is lower than 4 feet.
Zoning permit?
Thank you.
So I move that we approve expenditure of $5,940 towards construction of a retaining wall on the property line between 2506 Wood Drive and 2514 Woods Drive, subject to all four, both builders and both homeowners signing a release as drafted by the city attorney to prevent any future city liability regarding maintenance of the wall. Is there a second?
And I'll second that again.
Discussion?
Just a quick question. The elevation data that you were provided by the builder of the property on the right, does that data meet the requirements of an as-built survey if we were starting to require it? In other words, is that sufficiently legally defensible that you're confident it's right?
Well, it's signed by a registered land surveyor, so I'm
Okay.
assuming that the registered land surveyor is abiding by his license.
Okay, perfect.
All right, so we have a valid motion. All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All opposed? Motion carries unanimously.
Mayor, before you move on, you had us include some pictures of,
Yeah,
just a quick little intro to the workshop. There's a couple of other topics we're going to be covering as part of that workshop. This picture does a fabulous job of highlighting our lack of topsoil issue. You'll note there's no topsoil in that photo, which is another issue that is along the same types of lines of, we have an ordinance, we require topsoil to be provided, but we have no mechanism in place for ensuring that that topsoil is actually provided on a lot-by-lot basis. So that's another topic we're going to be covering at the workshop. And then also the issue where homeowners come in and after the fact and clear a bunch of trees without a permit.
Just as a point of reference for those, as far as the topsoil, if I remember right, the ordinance requires 6 inches, is that right?
Correct.
And on the picture on the right, that's an example where a homeowner clear cut down to the land. They weren't supposed to do that. We need to look at that ordinance and see what kind of changes need to be made to that so that we can enforce those ordinances going forward. And that ordinance, at least in relation to the picture to the right, those trees are and the brush and the other thing is supposed to be kept there because it helps with the runoff and helps filter the water, helps keep the water quality cleaner. Is that accurate?
Yeah, it depends on the location. I don't know that that specifically applies for this photo because I don't know where it was taken, but that's a part of the.
So these are a couple other ordinances where they're on their books. We may need to adjust them. We may need to figure out a way to enforce them. And if we decide we're not going to keep them, then we need to get rid of the ordinance. So, thank you.
We'll be covering that at a workshop at the next meeting.
All right. Rext item, 6C, Kelly, general fund budget.
Yes, Mayor Funk sent an email last Wednesday to Doug Reeder and me stating that he wanted an across-the-board budget freeze for the 2019 budget. What that would mean was each department would need to cut their spending, the proposed level, to match the last year's spending. So with that, we have that as an item for discussion tonight. There would definitely be service levels that would be impacted by a budget freeze. One example would be the police coverage. Each year that goes up, so if we had a freeze, we would have to reconsider if we wanted to continue, or could we be able to offer 24/7 police coverage. So that was just one example of what a freeze would mean. The city council did approve a budget at their September 10th meeting, so we wanted to get a jump on this if that's the direction council would like to go. So with that,
Thank you,
over to
Kelly.
you.
Yeah, I've been looking at a number of different things as far as spending. I've been reviewing credit card statements. I've been looking at expenditures with consultants and just generally across the board, the salary increases. I'm not suggesting that we cut from a police or fire, but conceptually, I'd like to see the budgets and our spending continues to climb. I think this year, what was it, 8% is we're spending more this year. Our budgets went up 8%. The concept I want to get across here, and I'm looking for the department heads to look at, is can we cut this spending? I'd like to see a 3% cut. If that's not achievable, fine. But I'd like to see something from staff that says, okay, we can maybe cut this much, and here's the items that we would have to not do. I think that's a valid discussion. We're not going to solve that here tonight, but before we approve all of the tax levies at the end of the year, I'd like to see us cut our spending. We're doing really well as far as the AAA rating. We continue to have a lot of growth, but that growth is going to slow down, and I want to slow down our spending. And so I don't recall where previous councils have ever looked at spending, and it's probably happened, but I'm just not aware of it. I want to actually take a across-the-board look from the department level to say, okay, what can we cut out? And so with that, that's kind of the concept behind this. 3% is not obviously written in stone, but I wanted to at least give a target to see if it's achievable. With that, council?
First of all, the proposal here shows the general fund as the primary vehicle here. The general fund has expenditures about 5.4 million, and the total city spending is in the neighborhood of 15 or 16 million if you add all the other departments and funds besides the general fund. So if we're going to take a look at expenses, costs, we should do this right, and we should look at everything, because everything affects the citizen, directly or indirectly. The general fund goes into the levy, but you know, you have water and sewer rates, you have charges for inspections, you have water hookup charges, you have all kinds of developer charges that indirectly affect the cost of homes, so on and so forth. So, you know, if we're going to do this, we should do it right and not just chop at the general fund. And the biggest piece of the general fund, 51% of the general fund, is salaries and other compensation, fringe benefits. And in that piece, that 51%, there are only 26 employees full-time, and there are 12 to 15 part-time employees. So this whole initiative, which would look good politically, is on the backs of a few dozen city employees. So we have to look at the perception here. We want to talk about perception. The perception is that we're going to have something that looks nice to the public, and we're putting it on the backs of 26 to 30 employees. So we need to do this right, and we need to take our time. We ready to approve the preliminary budget, and we've got till the first week in December to come up with our final. So we've looked at, there have been surveys of our salaries, and we know our salaries are in line with other cities in Carver County. I think we're in the middle of the pack or in the lower section of the pack. So we probably don't have any major salary problem. You could always say we should stop the growth and stop the cutting. A lot of the increase in our spending is due to adding headcount. If we add an additional sheriff's deputy, if we add a fire chief, if we add a building inspector, these are all real things. If we add a public works employee, these are all real things we've done in the past year or two. That's going to cost money. So we justified that. It's the cost increase isn't coming because we're giving people 6%, 7%, 8% increases or promotions. It's coming because we've added staff, and we've added staff deliberately and slowly. So I think it's a kind of a nice gesture, but the numbers game here is diabolical, and I'll tell you why. If you take a large organization such as a corporation that's multi-billion dollars in expenses, you know, a lot of these places are 200-300 billion in expenses, 40,000 employees. If you say you're going to do a 2% cut or a 0% or a 3%, the dynamics of the numbers, if you know anything about statistics, are a certain, there's a favor to that much size. We're talking about a general fund here, $5 million at 26 employees. So the dynamics are diabolically different. If you just say, oh, we can cut 2%, 3%, I think we have to be extremely careful, especially this is a very tight employment market. We don't want to do something that's going to have our good employees running out the door. We should always be thoughtful of costs. And we should always be looking at ways to better manage everything. You know, I have a question of, there are many other costs, and if you go outside the general fund, you see it. We spend a lot on engineering. You know, hundreds of thousands of dollars on engineering. We spend a lot on our IT. You can go on and on. So I think the idea of having a tight budget is fine, but to do something at this time where it's right before the election, it just sounds like we're doing it for political motivation.
No, I'm sorry, finish.
Okay, so I think we should, if we do something like this, we should get organized and do it citywide. All departments, all costs, all funds, and look for some real dollars here, not for 2% out of the general fund or 3%.
May I comment, sir?
Yeah, go ahead.
So 3% of 5.4 million is $162,000. And so what I'm gathering from your request is you're asking staff to identify $162,000 from the current planned budget, and you're asking council to support that. Quite frankly, my biggest issue with your request is the timing. Why didn't we know about this in June as we were going through the process? That is the process, and it is a very well documented and defined process. From a cut standpoint, I am always in favor of trying to find ways to save money. My understanding from the increases this year, they're largely due to the increase in services that have been requested by our citizens, with one of the primary ones being moving to 7x24 coverage with the Carver County Sheriff, which in the past we have not had. And there are two things that I have heard continuously over the past 8 years in talking to citizens about budget, and that is don't reduce my services and keep me safe. And so I'm concerned about the potential of, all right, if that's where the increase is, I don't want to cut that. But I also want to state very strongly that I do not agree with addressing a potential cut by looking at reducing salaries of our staff. That is, to me, that is unacceptable.
So I asked for a 3% cut. I'm fine with looking at every fund the city has. And that never did I say that it has to come from salary. Never did I say it had to come from police or fire. I said I was looking for a 3% cut. What I wanted the department heads to do is to look to places where we could cut that spending. And the reason this is coming up now is because I just within the last couple of weeks finished reviewing all of the credit card statements for the last 2 years. And I found things in there where I think there's money that we can cut. For example, I don't have the numbers in front of me, but I think it was like we spent $7,500 on food. I'm wondering why we're doing that. We haven't had a discussion, and I don't want to get into a debate tonight, but as far as the salaries that were compared to earlier before from Chanhassen, Chaska, in Waconia, cities that are 2.5 times our size versus cities that are 8 to 10 to 12,000 more appropriate to our size. All valid discussions, and maybe the salaries are right, maybe they're not. It has to be looked at. It doesn't mean that 3% comes from the salaries. In addition, I have looked at engineering costs, and I have numbers here actually in front of me, so let me kind of paint the picture, if you will, for the residents. Focus Engineering, Karen's, for people that know, we call her the city engineer, but she's actually, is it president, or what's your title?
Yes.
President of Focus Engineering. She's actually a consultant that's worked for the city for 10 years? A long time. And a lot of what she builds the city, or at least, let me rephrase that, part of what she builds the city in support of development projects is actually rebuild or paid for by developers as they put development in. So if you take those fees that she bills the city and you take them out, since the city's reimbursed from those, based on some rough numbers, and there may be some rounding errors in here, but I looked at how much we're paying Focus Engineering. And for the year of 2015, it looks like we paid $271,500. The year of 2016, we paid $407,500. The year of 2017, we paid $361,000. And 18 up through June, which is only half the year, we've paid $226,000. And I got these numbers from Kelly Grinnell. So you look at these numbers, I think it raises a question is, should we be considering hiring staff to do some of that work, because that may be cheaper than the consultants. This is something that we can look at. You can go through and find other things like this when you start looking at the expenses and where we're spending money. And I believe that's an exercise that is worthwhile. And if we can cut our spend, even if it's only $150,000, that's $150,000 we can either redirect into our trails, our crosswalks, or our roads that we know we need to pay for, or in fact, reduce taxes by a little bit more. So that was the concept behind it, and why this only came up recently, because I've only had a chance recently to finish some of these reviews. Council?
May I comment?
Yep.
So, and thank you for that information and the detail. And I asked that question once a long time ago too, specific to the city engineer and why do we spend all that money? It's not an insignificant amount, and why wouldn't we hire someone in that role? And those are wonderful questions to ask and questions that we should be considering. The answer that was provided to me at the time was that as a small city, our staff is required to do a lot of different things. They're required to wear a lot of hats. And by hiring a city engineer, we would be limiting the skill set in terms of the capability of the individual within that single role. And by having a consultant, we gain access to an entire portfolio of people that have a diverse background and capability to cover a myriad of needs which our city has. And so the decision has been made in the past to do this through a consultancy so that we have access to that deep bench, so to speak, of skill sets for the wide variety of capabilities that we need. And so I'm not trying to say and justify, I'm trying to explain why this has been done in the past. I personally think those reasons are still valid. And to make a decision counter to that, we would have to understand the skill sets that potentially we would still have to go out for expertise, and this may actually increase our costs, but it's a valid analysis.
So I would still like to see the staff look at the spend at the various, using any fund that you want. In fact, I don't think any fund should necessarily be off limit. And let them come back with something to say, you know what, we could cut a little here, we could cut a little there, and see if they can come up with some savings. And looking at this, Councilmember Striegel, go ahead.
Thank you. I'm frankly trying to keep up with the bouncing ball here. We had several months of fairly normal budget dialogue, good depth of information presented from the finance manager talking about increases, decreases, changes, new, old, and understanding what was driving all of the numbers. And I think we were relatively all on the same page. And then I hear 3% decrease tonight, but last Wednesday, Mr. Funk sent Mr. Reeder an email saying, I want an across-the-board budget freeze for next year's budget. And this wasn't copied to any other council members. This was strictly to Mr. Reeder and Ms. Grinnell.
That's because
That
it would be an
means
open
each
meeting law
budget
violation.
needs- Excuse me. That means each budget needs to cut their spending to match last year's spending, period. No increases. The resulting savings need to be applied to next year's tax rate so that taxes are reduced dollar for a zero-sum game. Mayor. Now, ignoring the fact that that's not a request, it's a directive, which is completely exceeding anyone on this council's authority, it's lacking any vision, any kind of goals, targets, priorities, anything, not to mention input from staff or input from the other council members that are needed to build consensus for a motion that can pass. I look at what is increasing, and we're up $450,000 year on year. $350,000 of that are things that have been individually identified, voted on, and approved, and have carryover costs. For example, the extra sheriff was a partial year last year. So unless we want to cut sheriff service levels, we have to increase that $41,000 this year. We have $17,000 in workman's comp increases. That's not negotiable. I think that's required by statute. We have $50,000 increase to the Park and Trail Fund, which was a new fund that was set up, and that's the increase in that funding to that versus last year. We have the Long-Term Street Maintenance Fund, which we're increasing by $100,000, and per the earlier discussion from tonight, that may not even be enough. We've got Lake Wasserman Park, which I think the mayor's comment was, it's only 80 grand, we can find that somewhere. We have a new public works employee, and I think we talked earlier that we've got 26 staff in the city. If I'm not mistaken, our low a couple years ago might have been 24. But in any case, we heard earlier tonight that we've added 23 miles of roads, and we might have added 1 or 2 head count in the last 8 years that I've been on this council. So that new public works employee, which is the guy who drives the snow plow and the lawnmower and, the street sweeper, and that's $54,000 a year. We've got 20 or 30-year-old playground equipment in Katy Hills Park that was put in for a $50,000 upgrade replacement, and a fuel card reader at the Public Works building for $30,000. So when you add all this up, that's $350,000 out of the $450,000. So I guess I'm a little bit challenged to understand how everybody's supposed to sort this out at the 11th and a half hour when all this stuff's been approved. We don't say we want to cut salaries, nor does any of the data suggest we should. We're already losing employees, and we wonder why we can't keep track of our ordinances. This council every single year has challenged staff to reduce budgets. The normal process is, during a budget meeting, is somebody would make a motion on a target, make a motion to have the staff come back with cost reduction potentials and the impact of those cost reductions, and then we would review those line by line at a future meeting, and we would gain consensus around that. If that's where we want to go, then I'm all ears, and I'd like to hear your priorities and where you think that they should cut from.
I'd like, first off, I didn't send the email to the whole council because that's an open meeting law issue. So I sent it to the city manager. I want to see a 3% reduction, but I'm more than happy.
What's the target? What's the 3% off of?
It's up to the staff to look at it and say, where can they find the money?
Is it off last year's budget or this coming year's proposed budget?
No, so let me be clear. I would like to see, if we can't get to, there's an increase this year of 8%. If we can't go back to last year's budget, fine. I'd like to see us decrease that by 3%. Where that money comes from, up to staff to look at it and see if there's recommendations. What fund it comes from, less important to me than to see if there's ways that we can cut our spending. A lot of this just gelled for me recently with some of the budget numbers and some of the reviews I've been doing where I think there's costs. There's also another thing. If we can't cut the spend, maybe we can look at something like right now the city does all the snow plowing for the downtown property owners. And as far as I know, the property owners don't pay us anything for that. Well, you just mentioned $54,000 for a public works employee that does all of that. Plus there's the wear and tear and the maintenance on the equipment. Well, if we can't cut spending to reduce, because there's concerns about reducing services, fine. Let's look at that. We don't plow the snow for the residents, but we plow everything downtown. So maybe that's something where we can look at to say, okay, well, let's get some revenue for that since the city and the taxpayers are in fact paying for all this. I'm open to options. What I'm trying to drive at here is the fact that I'd like to cut our spending where we can, where it's reasonable and makes sense, and we can get consensus on the council. And maybe we do look, that we're coming into the snow season, maybe we look at charging these downtown property owners a fee for doing all of the snow removal. So I'm open to any other ideas that people come up with. Some of this has been brought to me by residents to say, is there something that we can do to kind of cut the spending, right? And, to me, it makes sense. I'd like to do the review. And if the council doesn't agree, that's fine, but that's my opinion. Council?
Kelly, at our last budget meeting where we approved the preliminary levy, there was an option that was presented that was a slight reduction, and it escapes me. What was the amount of that reduction?
In the preliminary budget that was approved, we have $80,000 set aside for contingency. So initially we had talked about possibly having $50,000, but through further refining of the budget, we upped that to $80,000. So there is an $80,000 amount out there that's not formally designated anything, but was set aside as a possibility for league insurance changes, or if we wanted to put money towards a parking solution or crosswalk improvements. So we have that amount in the budget.
Is that the amount that at the last conversation we said, let's target splitting the difference?
Yes.
Yeah, and as I recall, that there were two of us that suggested that we would support that, or that was important to consider at the final levy, and then I recall the mayor supporting that too after the vote was taken. I still want to pursue that, and if there are other opportunities to look at reductions, I would be interested in doing that too. I remain concerned at doing this at the last minute in a significant fashion, but I'm not really in favor of I'm definitely not in favor of the request via email. And if we really are determined to go back and look at it from that perspective, this merits a workshop and a very detailed discussion.
Is it realistic to ask all the department heads to come back and when I say department heads, I'm not excluding anything. I think everything's on the table, but is it realistic that within the next 2 weeks we could come back with a budget that represents a 5% increase versus last year? I think that gets close to your 3% target reduction. And what specific items that would affect, both in terms of, whether it's manpower, salary, equipment, whatever it is, funding for other, transfers, whatever that is. Is that realistic to do that in a couple of weeks, Kelly?
Well, if you're looking at total expenditures and transfers, the total increase year over year is 10.1%. And of that amount, it's $478,000. $250,000 of it is coming from increases in transfers, and includes that $80,000, what I'd call a discretionary transfer.
But the biggest one is streets.
The biggest one is the streets, going up $100,000. Expenses are going up by $228,000, or 5.5%. So depending upon how you'd like to see cuts
Well-
coming. If it could come from transfers, if you want to see it from the expenditure side, that would be helpful to staff.
Okay, so what's the difference here? I mean, because I also remembered that we were looking at something around an 8% number. So the difference between 10.1 and 8, where are we not aligned here?
I'm wondering if you're thinking of maybe the levy increase percentage?
Could be.
'Cause we had some
Would
other
that be
revenues.
around 8%?
It could be. I'd have to go back and check the.
So if that was our goal, was to limit the levy increase to 5%, is that a number you can work with? Is that?
Was that for me?
Well, I was asking Kelly in terms of getting, data pulled together, but I'm also looking at you, Mayor, to say, is that meet with what you had in mind?
So 2 quick points. The 3% is arbitrary, as I knew it would start this discussion, and I think this is the right thing to do. Secondly, I understand it's late in the process. If we can't do an in-depth review, and I wouldn't argue with that again because it's late in the process, but back to my original point, I just finished reviewing some of the stuff that made me think we need to look at some costs. I'd be happy with the staff reviewing the expenditures to see if they can come back to a list for the council for review that can cut deeper and cut deeper in the sense of minimizing the increased spend, or maybe there's some things that we can look at that we can live without to lower that spend. I don't want to presuppose or direct a particular police, fire, or any other fund. I want them to go back and sharpen their pencils and say, is there something that we can do? Given the timeline, I'm fine if they look at this and say, yeah, here we can get another, I'm going to make up a number, 100,000. I don't know whether they can or they can't. But for the sake of this discussion, let's say they can. We can get 100,000, but here's the things that we would have to say we have to get rid of. That's the kind of discussion I'd like to see have. I'm not opposed to a workshop if there's value in doing that. But I'd like to get the staff to at least look at something given the short timeline. And I thought that we didn't approve the final budget until December. That may be the tax levy.
No, we approved the preliminary one. We can only reduce it in December.
Okay, so.
It is December, you're correct.
Right, we all agreed on the upper limit, and between now and December when we approve the final, that gives us, I think, enough time to at least look at things to see if there's ways that we can cut our spend in various places, and at least have the staff bring back to the council a list of saying, here's some possibilities for the council to discuss and consider. Workshop is probably the best place to do that, and I don't, Kelly, what, 6 weeks, 4 weeks? How long do you think you'd need to put that together if the council so decides?
I think maybe the first meeting in November would work. I'm not sure about our current workshop schedule to see if we already have something planned for a workshop that night. But we also have a finance committee meeting coming up that I think we'd probably bring it to the finance committee meeting for October.
See if they have any ideas?
Yeah.
Well, and so the option that we discussed at the preliminary levy was a flat tax rate. And I do want to see that. I want to see what it means and whatever that percentage is as compared to what the mayor's request is. It's understanding the difference there, but I am interested in understanding what the option would be for a flat tax rate.
Well, the city already is recommending a lower tax rate.
Excuse me, I apologize. I said that wrong. Thank you. And I'm not remembering what it was. There was a reduction of a certain percent.
We were presented with a choice.
There's a high option and a low option. What was the low option?
You mean that at the last meeting we had where we approved the levy? When
Yes.
we were so at that meeting we were discussing the $80,000 in a discretionary transfer, and that's where the split came about to.
So if we took that 80,000 out, it reduced the effective tax rate by a couple tenths of a point, I think, correct? From
I think
32.7 to maybe
It would take
32.5
the
roughly.
increase down by almost 2%. 2% over the prior year, or from what we're proposing. So.
Tax rate isn't our problem.
Yeah, no, I'm all in favor of looking for places to cut spending. We are a little late in the process, and I think that would be a noble goal. going forward for the next year's budget. But at this point, the one issue that jumps out at me is we don't have anything in here for Wasserman. Is that correct?
We don't have anything for Wasserman, and we're going to be talking about that. Is it the next? Well, hopefully the next meeting. We're still working with the watershed district on that, but we're hoping to bring that back to council. And right now, there is a potential to just use franchise fees to make the debt service payments on that, so it would not impact the tax levy.
But that was just for the cost of the land. We are giving a.
This would be for the land and the amenities.
Oh, really?
Yes.
We're wrapping it into one?
Yep.
All right. The,
So let's have a workshop and discuss it then.
right, and would the council agree that this guidance is basically take a high-level review to see if there's any quick hitters or other options that the council can consider as far as reducing our spend, and then have that in a workshop tentatively for the, what was it, first meeting in November? Is that what you were suggesting?
Yeah, and I'll have to check and see what we've got for other.
Okay, pending
workshops.
confirmation that that time works. Council,
I think that's good guidance. But I would add that if we find some money, if say we found 100,000, 150,000, I don't know what it would be. I can tell you, we've got 100,000 worth of stuff that isn't even in that budget. That is very serious, that we're not trying to do anything. I'll give you an example. The first year I was on the council, which was before I was elected, I was appointed for a year. It came out twice that we had opportunities to extend trails that were just gross misconnections, where the neighbors were screaming for trail connections. It was safety issues. And the council batted those requests down fairly quickly, saying, we don't have the money. And it's not in the budget. We don't have the money. Well, last year I was on the finance committee, and I recommended that we start to build the trail and parks fund for special monies for trail connections. And we put in, was it 100,000 last year?
Yes.
And another 150. This is the kind of thing we've got to be doing. Stepping up here, because we're running from stuff that faces us and looking for 100,000 here in cost reductions that might come out of 26 employees' hides. You know, we have to step up at some point and identify all these things that we think are we're going to need to pay for in the next few years that are important. And, you know, one of the best things about a well-run city is good accounting. Now, generally accepted government accounting standards allow for the development of reserve positions for needed expenditures. So, I mean, we should not be shy, and we should be identifying what the city needs in the next 2, 3, 4, 5 years. And if there's a funding mechanism for it, and we don't want to raise the levy, we don't want to raise the tax rate, so we've got to, play that game and make it work. But we're running from hundreds of thousands of dollars of expenditures that we're going to have to pay for. This intersection safety thing, the city's probably going to be on the hook for over 50% of it, maybe 60%, and the county will pay the difference, but that could be a few $100,000. We don't have that money. We should be trying to find it. And instead of trying to find these things, we're thinking of cutting, which is a good thing. We should control our costs, but we can't run from reality here. If we find some of these things, we should probably apply it to some of these needs instead of reducing our levy.
to me, it's a two-step process. First, let's see if there is some money that the council decides to cut that spend. And then the second question, assuming there is do we reduce taxes or do we assign that money to one of the funds, crosswalks, trails, whatever the case may be, a Wasserman Park. But we can't do that until we first find out whether or not there's any cost cutting that we can do. Councilmember Strugel?
No, I'm in agreement. There's, we have to know what we have and then decide what. I think the whole thing boils down to maybe just updating the motion to say we have a budget workshop to look at potential reductions to planned spend and reviewing priorities for other area needs.
Right, I would agree. I don't think we need a motion.
We don't
on
need a
this.
motion, just direction.
Right. Kelly, do you have a clear direction from the council on this? You want us to clarify?
What I understand, you're looking for approximately a 3% reduction, which would be.
That's an arbitrary number. Looking for what staff feels are things that we can cut. It'd be great to get 3%. I think it's too late in the game, to the points made by the council members, to do a full review and get that. So let's take a review, see if there's some high-level items or some easy hitters, if you will, that you can then bring to the council. Now, if you have time to do a little more, fine. I would defer to you as to review what you can in the time allotted and see what you can come up with that you can bring back to council. Council, fair enough?
It's fair, and one answer may be, I'm sorry, there isn't anything that we would recommend that we would cut. That's a valid answer.
I have a quick question. Do we have strategic planning in next year's budget?
Yes, we do.
A strategic plan, 2 or 3 sessions, kind of?
It's typically just been one session, so.
Is that what happened last?
We've done it both ways. We've had
Full
a
day.
single session, full day, but then I think the most recent one, Richard Fersman facilitated that, but then also came back for a review session with council to put a little more meat on the bones. So there may have been 2 meetings.
Because we desperately need a redo of our strategic planning.
I guess the point you're making is there some dollars set aside, and what can we expect to accomplish with that dollars?
No, I think we just cut that.
Just
Sorry.
All right, so Kelly, I think you have what you need.
Yes.
Okay, reports of, not Doug, but Kelly.
Nothing to report.
Is Ann still here? No. Oh, Ann, there's anything to add on here? It's got your name down at the bottom as far as the 3, no?
Unless anybody has questions, I'm happy to take them.
Okay, council, any questions on the, okay, seeing none. Bob?
No, sir, thank you.
Councilmember Crowley, reports?
No report.
Councilmember Striegel?
No report.
Councilmember Vogt?
no report.
Councilmember Gregory? I have none. I move that we adjourn. Is there a second?
Second.
All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
We are adjourned.
Really green.
Yeah.
It's like,
It's a strategic plan.